welcome Vice Mayor and City Council members, both here and virtually. I will note that Councilmember Nason is attending virtually for health reasons, which we all appreciate that she's able to be here virtually. Thank you. And with that, I will call this regular meeting of the Albany City Council for November 7th to order. Vice Mayor Tiedemann, would you read the land acknowledgement, please?
The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Liesjan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining an ongoing relationship with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. City Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Gary.
Here.
Councilmember McQuay.
Here.
Councilmember Nason.
Here.
And Vice Mayor Tiedemann.
Here.
Mayor Jordan.
Here. And Councilwoman Gary, would you care to join me over at the podium?
Okay.
Thanks. So as some of you may know and some of you may not, this is Councilwoman Gary's last meeting this evening. So we're very appreciative for her service to the city. And so in recognition of that, I will read the following. Whereas Janelle Gary was elected to the office of City Council in November 2020, and whereas Janelle Gary subsequently served the city as mayor and as councilwoman, and whereas Janelle Gary has represented the city by serving as appointee and/or alternate on several regional bodies, including the Association of Bay Area Governments General Assembly, the Alameda County Library Advisory Commission, the East Bay Sports Field Recreation Authority, and the Waste Management Authority, and whereas Janelle Gary has also represented the city at the Alameda County Mayor's Conference during her service as mayor, and whereas Janelle Gary has also represented the city by serving as appointee on the Rouster College of Natural Resources Dean's Advisory Committee on the Gill Tract, and whereas Janelle Gary has served as the council's appointee to the Community Task Force on Policing and served as its chair by appointment of the body. And whereas in that role, Janelle Gary oversaw the Community Task Force on Policing's development of and forwarding to the council with recommendation to pass the resolution that established Albany's forthcoming policing commission. And whereas Janelle Gary led the city council to approve the city requiring retail businesses to provide their employees premium pay in the early months of the COVID pandemic to compensate them for the risk they were taking to continue providing services to the benefit of others, including all of us. And whereas Janelle Gary led the city council to direct the city to support the celebration of Juneteenth beginning in 2021 and organized highly successful events for the community to mark the holiday, raise awareness, and uplift the voices of African Americans and allies in Albany during each year of her tenure. And whereas Janelle Gary led the city by action of the city council to recognize the Confederated Villages of Liesjan as one of the original peoples of the land now occupied by Albany, to create and install signage at main entrances to Albany acknowledging it is on Ohlone land, to draft in consultation with the Confederated Villages of Liesjan a land acknowledgement to be read at the beginning of every city government meeting, and to continue working with Segurite Land Trust to develop and propose the payment of Shumi and a plan to rematriate appropriate public lands. And whereas Janelle Gary led the city council to approve having a COVID testing center in the city by partnering with Curative. And whereas Janelle Gary accomplished all this during 1 year and 11 months of service at the time of her resignation, now therefore be it resolved that the city council of the city of Albany hereby extends its appreciation to Janelle Gary for her service as councilwoman and mayor of the city of Albany. And with that, something to remember us by. So thank you so much. sorry? Oh, please, yes. I was going to have the, yes, please, if you want to come forward. That's okay. I'm just getting back to my, my home base here. Yes, please, if there's public comment, that would be most welcome.
Over there.
Well, the mayor kind of stole my theory. But I think, you know, we felt like in one year we had this like really great, wonderful, progressive year when Janelle was our mayor. And I'm going to repeat some of the stuff he said because as a citizen of this city, I forever appreciate what you've done. You established premium pay for the workers at big box stores, changed the holiday known as Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, recommended that the council incorporate Juneteenth as a city-paid holiday. The mayor recommended that the council recognize the Confederated Villages direct signage, which we now have in our city. You could see these signs, except not at the boundary where my house is, on the Berkeley-Albany boundary, but anyway. She worked on the land acknowledgement, which we now say. She was influential in getting the public police oversight and the COVID testing. So, Janelle, we felt like we had a really wonderful, progressive year, the year you were mayor, and appreciate all of your hard work on behalf of the other citizens of Albany.
I just want to add my thanks to Margie's, and I'm so glad that we had a chance to have you be mayor. And I wish you good luck in whatever you do next, and I know that whatever you do, they'll be really lucky to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor Janelle Gary, it's Jeremiah here. I just want to say thank you for your outstanding service for our community. You know, I really hope Juneteenth is a thing that sticks and stays around, and I hope the future city council continues to fund that. And just what a great thing for you to be part of this community. So I don't want to take up too much time. I know we got a long meeting ahead of us, but Janelle Gary, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and everything you've done for this community. It's sad to see you go. I did actually cry when you announced it because you're a very special person. And so I just want to say thank you a million times over. Keep up the good work, and I hope your future, whatever happens or whatever you do in the future, you're very successful and you continue your leadership in this world, in our community, and I just wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Are there any, I don't see on the screen that it looks like there's anybody out in the virtual world. Okay. To bring it to council, do council members have any comments that they'd like to make?
Yeah, I would just like to wish you the very best as you go forward in the rest of your life, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.
And I will just echo Councilmember McQuaid's comments. I wish you the best of luck, and thank you for serving with us.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Councilwoman Gary,
That's
Nason. Sorry.
I just wanted to chime in and add my voice to the rest of the council in expressing our appreciation and for your service as both as a council member and as a mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, hard to move on from that, but we will. We'll move to the next proclamation, which Councilmember McQuaid will read. This is a proclamation for Native American Heritage Month.
Okay. I'm sorry, let me pull it up.
Okay.
All right.
I guess I'll do a process check. We didn't actually take a vote on the resolution for Councilwoman Gary, but we all signed it, so I presume I can consider that as a as a resounding passage of the resolution. Okay.
Okay, you ready?
Sure.
City of Albany Proclamation in recognition of Native American Heritage Month, November 2022. Whereas on August 3rd, 1990, President George H.W. Bush declared the month of November as National American Indian Heritage Month, thereafter commonly referred to as Native American Heritage Month. And whereas there's a reason you don't do this on your screen. Your screen just crashed on me. Could I?
Yeah,
I'm
you
really
want to
sorry.
take it from,
Thank you. Whereas National Native American Heritage Month is a time to celebrate the tradition, languages, stories of Native American, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, and island communities, and ensure their rich histories and contributions continue to thrive with each passing generation. And whereas National Native American Heritage Month recognizes Indigenous peoples, past and present, and honors tribal sovereignty, promotes tribal self-determination, and upholds the United States treaty responsibility to tribal nations. And whereas the United States government has not always delivered on its promise of equal dignity and respect for Native Americans. For centuries, broken treaties, dispossession of ancestral lands, and policies of assimilation and termination sought to decimate Native populations and their way of life. And whereas Native Americans still suffering from generations of these policies are disproportionately impacted by homelessness and the COVID pandemic, and whereas despite this painful history, Indigenous peoples and their governments and their communities have persevered and flourished, and whereas Native Americans have made immeasurable contributions to our country and local communities as teachers, scholars, scientists, doctors, writers, and artists, business leaders, elected and public officials, including Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland, the first ever Native American cabinet secretary, members of the military, and so much more. And whereas the brave Native American code talkers in World War I and World War II saved lives by signaling enemy movements, transmitting orders, and coordinating attacks under fire. And whereas the City of Albany recognizes and honors the history of the Indigenous people who originally lived in this area by reading a land acknowledgement prior to every city council and advisory body meeting, and including this statement as part of official city documents such as the housing element and Parks and Recreation and Open Space Master Plan. And whereas the City of Albany acknowledges and appreciates our relationship with the Ohlone people through signage at our borders, declaring this to be Ohlone territory, and by flying the flag of the Confederated Villages of Lejeune at City Hall. And whereas the City of Albany commits to recognizing the original caretakers of the land and collaborate and explore potential partnerships with Indigenous communities, as is written in the Park and Recreation and Open Space Master Plan. Now therefore be it proclaimed, the Albany City Council hereby declares November 2022 as Native American Heritage Month and November 25th as Native American Heritage Day. We encourage all members of our community to celebrate and study the rich culture of Native Americans. Dated November 7th, 2022, signed by Preston Jordan, Mayor.
thank you. So with that, we will proceed to the next proclamation, which is for United Against Hate Week.
Thank you.
Is there, okay.
Thank you. I'll just read this one. City of Albany Proclamation in recognition of United Against Hate Week, November 13th to 19th, 2022. Whereas since January 2017, there has been an alarming increase in ideologies using hatred as a means of intimidation, and whereas attacks on Black, Indigenous people, immigrants, members of the Asian American Pacific Islander community, Muslims, people of color, women, Jewish people, the LGBTQIA community, and our most vulnerable are now commonplace, resulting in an uptick in hate crimes and the open promotion of xenophobic ideas. And whereas places of worship, including synagogues, churches, mosques, festivals, shopping malls, and nightclubs, have become the target of white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and others espousing hatred. And whereas in 2018, responding to these events and to clearly state our shared values, Berkeley developed the Berkeley Stands United Against Hate campaign, which was adopted by Albany as well as many other cities in the Bay Area, and served as a uniting and hopeful beacon during a challenging time, declaring our commitment to inclusivity. And whereas, to further counter the divide currently facing our nation, cities across the Bay Area and the nation are organizing the 5th United Against Hate Week that will take place November 13th through 19th, 2022. And whereas events will focus on breaking through positionality, communicating in conflict, and working together to achieve common goals, promoting education, compassion, and cooperation, which are key to embracing differences between people. Now, therefore, the Albany City Council does hereby declare November 13th to November 19th, 2022, as United Against Hate Week in Albany, and will support and encourage appropriate educational and community events. Dated November 7th, 2022, Preston Jordan, Mayor. And if I may take a few seconds?
Sure.
I would like to share some of the events that will be happening in our community next week. There will be 2 films shown beginning at 6:30 at the Albany Senior Center, 846 Masonic. Both of these films are appropriate for high school students and obviously adults. On November 15th, we will show And Then They Came for Us. This film brings history into the present, telling of the Japanese incarceration during World War II and following Japanese-American activists as they speak out against the Muslim registry and travel ban. And after the film, there'll be question and answer and discussion with film director Abby Ginsberg and Sasuke Ina, who is featured in the film. The following day, on November 16th, we will show Disclosure. This film examines the history of Hollywood's depiction of transgender people and the impact on both the transgender community and American culture dating back to the silent film era. The Albany Library has a host of activities recognizing United Against Hate Week, including online bystander training on November 9th and an action list which will have prizes upon completion. And the action list is suitable for younger children. And I want to thank Rachel Shear, the Albany Library Manager, for her work in organizing these programs, and to the Friends of the Albany Library for their generous financial support. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank the library as well. With that, we turn to the city manager's report. City manager, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. A brief report for you this evening. A reminder, I think we all know that tomorrow is Election Day, but just a gentle reminder to turn in your ballots either by USPS mail, postmarked by tomorrow, November 8th. We also have a drop box outside of City Hall in the back of our building. I just dropped mine off before the meeting. And also at the accessible voting centers. Tomorrow they will be at our Albany Community Center and the church on the corner. For more information, you can see our website, albanyca.org/vote. We've had a few earthquakes recently, so another reminder of an available program to our community, Earthquake Brace and Bolt Program. Registration is open until November 29th to apply to get up to $3,000 towards earthquake retrofit of your home. It's developed by the California Earthquake Authority and helps facilitate seismic repairs. Displayed here on our screen, earthquakebracebolt.com. We are in phase 6 of our sidewalk repair program. Excellent work through our Public Works Department. We have 34 locations approved by our Transportation Commission for repair, a total of approximately 5,000 square feet of sidewalk repair and replacement. Project construction took about 3 weeks, and photos and more information are available on our construction alerts and sidewalk program web pages. Marin Avenue is undergoing a much-needed rehab project in the foreseeable future. We're very excited to announce that work on the Phase 1 portion of Marin pavement rehab began today. The project includes paving, storm drain, and curb ramp improvements on Marin Avenue from Cornell to Key Route Boulevard. Of course, weather permitting and unexpected rain, such as today, permitting. So please be aware of this construction, where it's anticipated to be completed by spring of 2023. New electrification incentive guide. We have a breakdown of rebates and incentives, all available for home improvement projects, including new funding that has been made available through different entities, including the Inflation Reduction Act. Check our website at albanyca.org/electric for a full roundup of all the information available. And that actually completes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager, and I'll just follow up your comment on some earthquakes occurring recently. I found that some people don't know about the MyShake app, so I would encourage you to get that if you can. It provides early warning. So if an earthquake occurs some distance away, light traveling faster than the earthquake waves through the earth, you can get a notification that there's an incoming earthquake wave and take preventative action. If anyone would like to ask a question about or comment on the city manager's report, please press your raise hand. Well, please press your raise hand button. I don't know if anybody's out there, or just line up as I see somebody has. You will have 1 minute to ask your question. If you are on the phone, please press your hand by raising *9. Note this is for questions and comments on the city manager's report only. If you have comments on matters not on the agenda, the time for those is next. In this and all comments and questions during the meeting, please address the council, not other attendees, and respect each person that has spoken. Council wants everyone to feel comfortable speaking, not to be intimidated by others' comments or reactions. And I see one individual who wants to ask a question.
Yeah, just about the Marin street rehabilitation. I noticed driving up Marin at nighttime, it's very, very dark. And I know improving the streets is gonna be nice. It's just gonna make the cars drive a lot faster. May look a little nicer. But the real issue is the lighting. And if we're gonna be making the streets nicer, we gotta incorporate it being safer to cross the streets, which means more lighted crosswalks. I don't know if anybody's driven up Marin at nighttime, but it is dark and it is dangerous. So updating the streets is really nice, but I really encourage, if you're gonna update the streets, do it right, make it safe for the community, and install lighted crosswalks where you could push a button and the crosswalk is lit up. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see a flag that anybody out in, oh, there's a raised hand. Welcome.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. I was wondering if there are any plans for, Garfield Street, where, it's kind of chewed up down there. I know part, I guess, is in Albany and part is Richmond. Are there any, is that something that could be addressed in the future?
So we'll take your comment and we'll consider whether to refer it to staff or not when you're done.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. And is there anybody else? So I don't expect staff to have this at their fingertips. No, they don't. I'm not aware of any plans to rehabilitate or maintain the pavement on Garfield in the near future myself. And I think that's probably accurate. I live pretty close by, so yeah. All right. We will move on to good of the city. This is for attendees to provide the council comments, information, and questions on an item that is not on the agenda. Please raise your hands now or stand up to speak. By phone, again, is *9. By state law, known as the Brown Act, the council cannot discuss items that are not on the agenda except under extraordinary circumstances. Other items raised may be referred to a future agenda or to staff for comment. And I see one person at the podium. Please proceed. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was just wondering about the fact that the city of Albany doesn't pay, but dispatches for Kensington Police Department. I know Kensington is actually in Contra Costa County, so it's kind of interesting how Albany is responsible for another county's police department. And I was also wondering, as a side note, how much money does Kensington Police Department pay the city of Albany or the police department for their services? Is it $300,000 every year, or is it $300,000 every 2 years? It'd be nice to know some details on that. Also, I was wondering if the city of Albany can just go ahead and buy that private property on Albany Hill. I see it's listed for $10 million on the internet. And so I was wondering if the city of Albany might want to invest in just go ahead and purchasing that and making it Albany Hill a bigger park. Also, there's kind of an issue I noticed on planning and zoning, how planning and zoning does the parking requirements. I'm not sure what it's called, but they approve how you could build more units and there doesn't have to be parking on the private property, which directly impacts the streets, which directly impacts the Transportation Commission. So the Transportation Commission is left to clean up the mess from planning and zoning parking requirements. So it's kind of a catch-22 there. You got one commission doing parking requirements, which directly affects another commission's issues. So maybe we need to have, a teamwork there or some sort of checks and balances to where the Transportation Commission gets to be involved in making decision on parking requirements that directly affect their purview. Also, a couple things. I only have 1 minute left, but I noticed there's this truck in front of 720 Key Route. It's got a bunch of garbage bags on there, and the registration's over 6 months expired. So I talked to the police department about it, and they said there's an old lady that lives in the home, and it's kind of interesting. They said, "Hey, Jeremiah, you're a community guy. Why don't you go help the lady?" So I knocked on her door, and basically it comes down to she has trouble with doing a lot of things, such as paperwork and things like that. So I was wondering if the city can reach out to her through Albany Cares and help out a senior citizen. Also on Key Route on the 600 block, there's 2 cars parked over there. One has a 1996 expiration date, and the other has a 1998 expiration date. Notified the police, and they're not really doing anything about it, but that's about 20 years old. So I was just wondering what's going on with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Margie Marks. I want to talk about an incident that happened in our city in the last month. I have sent an email to the city council, and I've spoken about it twice in public meetings. But for me, it really feels like a not in my town moment, and I need to talk about it some more. It's an incident. I did not see it myself. I'm describing it second or third hand. An 11-year-old African-American child was chased through the streets of Albany, fearful for her life. She thought she was going to be killed. The police reaction, from what I hear, was number one, the citizens who chased her were only following their First Amendment rights. And two, if the family complained, that the daughter's crime would go on her permanent record. So what is happening now? Not a whole lot. The police chief called the mother last week and said, "How is your daughter doing?" And I want to tell you what she said, because I think it's really revealing and it makes me feel terrible. She said, "My daughter's 11 years old. She has an afro. She loves to wear hoodies. But I have to tell her how to act now when she goes out in the streets of Albany." This happened in the last month in our city. I wanted the city council, since we don't have the police oversight, form a subcommittee, investigate it. I think, we have this thing about, we just passed a resolution for the hate in our city. I'm asking you, please do something. I don't want children, brown and black children in particular, afraid of being in the streets of Albany. This happened. You can't sweep it under the rug and pretend it didn't happen and everything is okay now, because it's not, because that little girl is still afraid when she walks through our streets. And I want the city, the community to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love it when I get to go after Margie. I'd like to second everything that Margie just said. I've talked to the mom, and the response of the city and the police department, I don't know, maybe there's some legal reasons why they can't take action, but whatever it is, I would like to see the city take this very seriously, and also I think it's an indicator there are other people of color in the city who also feel afraid, and that's not right. So I hope that you will. I don't know what you can do, but I agree with Margie, it's just not right. The main reason I was going to say something, I just, and a couple things. One of them is I've just noticed that when you do the land acknowledgement and other times when you refer to the Ohlone people, you sometimes mispronounce things. So I think that if you're going to be respectful toward a people, that the first thing you could do is listen to somebody who's talking about how they pronounce, just listen to, I sent an email, I think a link to everybody, SEJC and the City Council, but I can send it again, where Karina Gould is pronouncing everything the way that they pronounce it. And that way, if you really want to show respect, that's the first place you start, is with who they are and how you say the words that they use. So I would really highly recommend that when you're talking about the Shiumi land tax, when you're talking about the Lashawn people, any words that you use that are not in part of your vocabulary, and practice in advance. Don't just have it all of a sudden there and you kind of stumble over it, but practice, because this is about respect, and I really would encourage you to show that respect. And also, when you're reading out something that's about the Native American people or the Ohlone people, I think it's important to not make it sound historical, but it's current. The Ohlone people have been here for thousands of years, and they are still here. They are not part of history. They're not like people that used to live here, and now we have all these people who aren't. They're actually still here, continue to be here, continue to be speaking their language. And so I really appreciate that we start with the land acknowledgement, and I'd like it to mean even more than it does now, and I think that would be a good start. Thank you.
Thank you. Hands raised.
Excuse me, Mayor, so I have a question.
Yes.
Hi. So now that the citizens have brought this issue out in public, what would be the next steps to kind of address this? So everyone is not wondering, what would be the outcome and possible options. So it'd be great if the city could make a statement to address what Ms. Marks brought up, and that way we're holding each other accountable. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be something to take up with staff. Onto the consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or a member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar. Does any council member wish to pull an item? Yes. Councilmember Nason. You're on mute, perhaps.
Sorry about that. 7-9.
Very good, 7-9. And I have nothing additional to that myself. Let's see here. If there is any member of the community that would like to pull an item, if you go ahead and pull that item and then make your comment.
All right. So 7475 and also 79.
74, 75, 79. And if you go ahead and please, proceed.
So regarding 74, we got an email for the SEJC. Someone wanted to be appointed to the SEJC, but the email said something about City Council can't appoint anybody new after November 1st. And it seems like during this meeting, the current date is after November 1st. and it looks like you're going ahead and appointing somebody to a commission. So I was wondering what's really going on with that. Is November 1st really a true date that you can't appoint anybody after that date? Because it seems like you are. And someone applying for the SEJC didn't get the opportunity because she was made aware that you can't be appointed after November 1st. So if you could check into that, please. 7.5, I was wondering, since this is a proclamation and it's United Against Hate Month and this is Transgender Awareness Week, I was wondering if the council member that recommended this proclamation, if it could possibly be read aloud during this meeting. And also 7.9, I remember when I attend pretty much every public meeting in Albany, and I remember this street tree inventory. It was a great idea. I made during public comment, I suggested it. I said, wouldn't it be nice if all the lemon trees were, people on private property that had lemon trees on the front yard, so you can go pick lemon trees or whatever if they wanted to give you permission, or just every street tree in general. You could click on it, on some sort of link, you can click on it, and it'll show the type of tree, possibly its birth date. I know the arborist said it's kind of maybe a little difficult to get the birth date of a lot of these trees, but we can at least start recording new trees that are planted and having their birth date. So on this street tree inventory, it would say the birth date of the tree, what kind it is, and things like that. And also it might have a street tree inventory to where it would show there was a tree there and it was chopped down, for whatever reason, so kind of the end date of that tree. I see here it's seeking $45,000. I mean, that's a lot of money considering the crossing guards is such a big issue and they only get $120,000 approximately. So, I mean, you could hire a couple more crossing guards and save a couple more lives. I'm not trying to bag on, the arborist asking for money for this, but I think $45,000 is a lot of money to make an online app or some sort of little website about street tree inventory. So maybe, I don't know, it's just kind of a lot of money.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to Council Member Nason.
Let me make sure I'm not on mute. I have a question about this. It seems to me that this is something that could be funded out of either the utility user tax or Measure M. Either one, it would fall within the purview of either one. But I do feel that, I'm daily at a couple of the parks. I'm at Terrace Park and it's beautifully maintained. But I'm also down at the waterfront and it's really poorly maintained, as it pretty much always has been. There's just trash and graffiti and, it's not a great sight down there. And it's, there's, these destroyed traffic control items lying in the road and everything. So I am kind of, that Measure M was passed it was represented to the public as primarily a park maintenance fund. And I think that given the challenges that we have with park maintenance right now, I would rather see this funding come from the new utility users tax.
Thank you. Any other comments on number 9? I looked at the code around Measure M, and it does specifically provide for spending some of the funding on the urban forest. What is proposed through 2022, based on what's up on the page, is $375,000 out of the $1.4 million that has been received so far from that tax. It did occur to me also that it could be funded by, I can't remember what we called it, the Climate Reserve Fund from the utility user tax. So I'd be in support of splitting the difference, if you're amenable to that, between the two. since they both have a nexus with this topic.
That's preferable to what's proposed. I would support that.
Okay, great. And I will comment in response to the public comment on the $45,000. I was actually amazed it was so cheap, given that there's 5,000 street trees or so in Albany, so that's $9 a street tree to build a database. That's pretty amazing. I'm amazed they can get it done for that. This must be a very efficient company. And to backtrack a little bit, there was a question about an appointment being made after November 1st, given the prohibition on appointments after November 1st in election years. Because that appointment was by an individual council member, it could have been made before November 1st. And I'm seeing from the city clerk that is in fact the case. So appointments are effective when, individual appointments are effective when the council member makes them and they're on the city agenda for information only. So this is one of the rare times when we've had 3 weeks between council meetings. Typically they're 2 weeks. So our last meeting was almost mid-October. So there were 2 weeks following that during which that council member could have made the appointment. And apparently they did do that. So I appreciate raising that for clarification, and no transgression has been made there. So with that, is there any motion to?
Could I ask staff a question?
Yeah, sure.
Do you or you see any problem with splitting the cost?
That's perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for asking.
You don't want to have it come back and bite us.
Yeah.
With that, I'll make a motion to approve consent with the change to splitting the cost of the tree inventory between UUT and Measure M.
Seconded.
Did you miss one?
Probably.
Yeah. He wanted you to read the proclamation or resolution, rather.
You know, the two that I read, we had invited people here to receive the proclamations. They were not able to come. And with that, I will decline the offer to read the other one.
The consent calendar with the adjustment to split the cost of the tree inventory between the UUT and Measure M revenue sources has been moved and seconded. City Clerk, please poll the council.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann,
Yes.
Councilmember Gary,
Yes.
Mayor Jordan,
Yes.
Councilmember McQuay,
Yes.
Councilmember Nason.
Yes.
The motion carries.
So with that, we move to a public hearing tonight. This regards appeal of the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission tree removal decision for street trees located at 1431 and 1433 Washington Avenue. I want to start by disclosing that I had contact with the applicant. This was before she actually appealed. I happened to be at an in-person evening meeting and met her and heard her concerns about the trees, and she subsequently appealed. I also want to disclose, since it will come up, that my wife and I have hired Big Chief Tree, which is owned by Peter Rudy, a report from Peter Rudy has been provided by the appellant. We've hired him more than once, given the quality of the work and the service that he's provided. I've also conferred with him and discussed with him how to structure sidewalks in order to reduce the interaction with street trees. And he provided me a book in that regard. And subsequently, the council adopted one of the recommendations there, which was to move the sidewalks away from street trees where possible when they were being repaired. Are there any other council members that have any disclosures? Yes.
I was at the exact same meeting as you and talked with the appellant before they had appealed, though I believe it was separate to your conversation with her. And that's it.
Thank you. Any other council members? Yes, Councilmember Nason.
I was also at that meeting and had conversations with at least one person. I'm not sure if it was the appellant, but I had conversations, I would say 2 or 3 people approached me on the tree issue. I also should disclose it's not a technical conflict or anything, but like in the spirit of the mayor's disclosure regarding his work with Big Chief, I should mention that my home is the site of a large liquid amber tree. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I think we're ready to go.
Sure thing. So, good evening, Mayor and Council. You stole my introduction, so I'll just move on.
I apologize.
No worries.
You have something to disclose?
No. It's just so I want to touch on the process that we're going to follow tonight, and this follows our standard process for appeals, and it'll start off with the staff report, and then we'll have an opportunity for council to question staff, and then the appellant will have an opportunity to make a presentation about 5 minutes, and again, we'll have questions from council to the appellant, then we'll have public comment, and then come back to the council for discussion and a decision. And just a couple minutes or a brief background on these trees. These trees were first brought to our attention in mid-August, and this was after a significant limb drop. And during the cleanup and response to that, our forester, John Hawkridge, who's here tonight as well, noticed that the original tree was at 1431 Washington, and during the cleanup, he noticed that the adjacent tree at 1433 Washington had some defects and that were concerning. And after that, he discussed with the property owners the defects, the concerns, and options for the trees. And after that discussion, prompted the submittal of applications for removal, which were heard at the September 8th Pros Commission meeting. And after considering a staff report, receiving a staff report, public comment, voted to approve the removals. And then on September 23rd, the city clerk received an appeal of the decision. And that brings us to where we are today. And just one quick note, it was brought to our attention earlier today that we made a clerical error on one of the postings. So we post on trees, the trees themselves and in polls around the area information about the public meeting, and we made a mistake saying that the appellant was actually the property owners. They weren't the property owners. It's another concerned citizen in the neighborhood. The good news is the mailers that went out to all the properties within a 150-foot radius of the two trees, we did not make that mistake. So I hope that clears that up. Now, in terms of the staff report, what we have here today, in response to the appeal, we engaged Hort Science, Bartlett Consulting, to do an independent analysis of the trees. This would be a risk assessment. And tonight we have Daria Barar from Hort Science to present her analysis and the findings. We also have John Hawkridge here, who will be available for questions, and the report, as well as all the documents associated with the Pros Commission and these trees are attached to the staff report. So with that, I'll turn it over to Daria.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Daria Barar. I am the Managing Consulting Urban Forester at Hort Science Bartlett Consulting, and I am a certified arborist. I also am tree risk assessment qualified, as well as plant appraisal qualified, and I'm also a registered consulting arborist. My background was in municipal urban forestry. I worked in the municipal sector for about 15 years before moving to the private sector, and I've been here for about 6.5 years or so. So we were asked to, there you go. Keep going, please. There you go. We were asked to assess the health and structural condition of the two trees, one at 1431 and 1433. And we looked at the risk assessment. You can keep going there. There you go. And to make management recommendations on those two trees. Our source material for this assessment is to use the Tree Risk Assessment Best Management Practices, which I'm also qualified in. And the risk looks at the likelihood of a tree falling and causing injury or damage. We performed a basic level 2 inspection, which includes a visual assessment from the ground, and those are described in this document and other textbooks. The tree at 1431, I want to talk a little bit about its condition. So what we saw when we got to the site was a tree in good health, but very poor structure. And our initial site here was to see that the tree had narrow branch attachments and multiple stems arising from a single point. So those, but what that means in plain English is that a narrow attachment is a possible failure point in any tree species. So immaterial of what kind of tree it is, these attachments lead us to think that there's a point at which the tree will likely fail. There was also a large canker on the street-facing branch, as you can see circled in red here. Additionally, there had been a failure, the failure that was talked about earlier, and you can see the wound in the tree high in the crown in this picture on the left-hand side, circled in yellow. Next slide, please. Thank you. The tree condition at 1433 here, again, good condition, poor structure. We again have these multiple attachments with seams, which is also a point of failure. On two sides, the seams had stress cracks, which is also a very poor sign and a sign that there may be decay in the attachment. Additionally, we found a decay pocket that was about 10 inches deep, and it appeared to extend into the lateral branches. It's difficult to test that without a level 3 risk assessment, which would include some kind of resistograph or decay testing like that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about risk in the public right-of-way. So when we're talking about risk, we talk about two major factors. One is the tree and its condition, and the second are the targets, right? Because if a tree fails in the woods and no one's there, it's not going to hurt anyone, and the damage doesn't really particularly matter. In this case, we have some targets that are inherent in the space that the trees occupy. So the target here, there are two types of targets. One is movable targets, and the other are immovable targets. So an immovable target is something like a roadway, a sidewalk, a house. Those things are static, right? We can't move them. People, however, and cars or vehicles, parked cars, vehicles moving on the street, are things that move and can change. So their occupancy rate is going to be different. Next slide, please. All right, so for these two trees, we evaluated 12 combinations of part and target. Those included branch and stem failure, person, parked cars, and houses. We evaluated 6 modalities for each of the two trees.
I'm just going to interrupt for just a moment because you're using STEM, which some people might not understand that. It took me a little while to figure it out from the context, so maybe you could say a little bit what STEM means to an arborist.
Yeah, STEM is like a main branch. Interchangeable a little bit from the word branch.
Okay. I think from the context, I sort of understood it as one of the many trunks.
Exactly.
More of a vertical element. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so in this picture, you can see 3 kind of stems.
Okay.
We would call a stem.
Okay.
Sorry about
Thanks.
that.
That's okay. I'm a geologist, so I'm well familiar with terms
Absolutely.
of art.
Good question. All right. There were 3 combinations that were found to be high-risk combinations. One was 1433, stem hitting a parked car. So that's that large lateral that we talked about earlier with the canker on it hitting a parked car. And then 1433 had 2 stem failures hitting either a parked car on the one side or the house on the other side. The other 9, just to clarify, were rated as low risk. So the other 9 modalities were low risk. But we did have 1 high risk for the 1431 and 2 for 1433. All right, so let's talk about a little bit about risk abatement options. So that's kind of the management recommendations we were asked to make in our report or our assessment. So in this scenario, there are really, let's say, 2 to 3 main things that we could do to look at the risk abatement of these trees. A would be to remove the trees. There would be 0 risk left associated with these trees because they would be removed. The second would be to cable, brace, or reduce. I'm going to go into cabling and bracing in a moment. Pruning would require reduction of the entire crown in order to lower the risk rating. So that would essentially be topping. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that terminology, but we would essentially be removing all of the green foliage on the tree in order to reduce risk. And that is not an arboricultural practice that is recommended. So that is not a recommendation that we made in this case. Our recommendation was to remove the trees and replace them. So I do want to go into cabling, bracing, and decay, particularly for the tree at 1433. So to cable or brace, we must have some, can you put the, thank you. Sorry about that. In order to cable or brace, we have to have some healthy wood to work with. And in this case, we see a lot of unhealthy wood that wouldn't be suitable for cabling and bracing. The goal of cabling is to support, not eliminate the failure points, right? To reduce the stress rather than to eliminate it. So I want to make that clear that we would not be removing the risk, we would just be reducing in this case. Of course, heavy pruning, something we talked about a moment ago, which is not within our arboricultural standards, is something that could be done in this case. I want to talk a little bit about the canker on tree 1431. So removing the stem with the canker would remove 1/3 of the tree. You can kind of get an idea of how large that limb is from this photograph. And the red line is trying to make a depiction of what it would look like without that stem. The remaining stems, if we were to make that recommendation and do that here, the remaining stems would have a much higher likelihood of failure because the way that trees develop, they develop reaction wood so that they're stable when there's a large limb removed, they no longer have that sort of stability based that they've been growing for many, many years. It additionally would leave a very large pruning wound, which would leave the tree open to potentially larger amounts of decay in that situation. So, can you move to that? Thank you. I wanted to write down what the definition was of a canker was, just to clarify, because I know that term is not something that you hear a lot of. A canker is a symptom of an injury, often associated with an open wound that has become infected by a fungal or bacterial pathogen. And that's the definition that the Morton Arboretum gives. That actually concludes my presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question. Thank you so much for the presentation. So the 3 items under the tree risk rating where it shows that the tree limb fell and hit 2 parked cars in the house, how much has the city paid out for damages on those 3 incidents? Do you know?
Oh, those are, we're looking at the tree and potential failures.
So it has not happened?
No.
Okay. So I know it's a bit deceptive because it's like, you know, if that has happened,
Right.
you know, that way we could determine what the cost point would be.
Right.
As far as removing or pruning versus what has happened. So this has not happened.
No, that has not happened.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully it won't happen.
I guess I might ask a follow-up question. I noticed in the staff report there were 4 limb failures in September. I don't know, well, 4 limb failures that were not induced by an external event, as far as I could tell, from liquid ambers. And to follow up that question, were there, are any of those the subject of ongoing potential payments?
So from what I understand, 2 of those hit cars and had damage. We haven't received a claim yet, but the window for submitting a claim has not closed.
Okay, thanks. Is there any kind of, I mean, you tell me if we're going too far here, city attorney, but I'm straight curious what the claim record is like around limbs falling. And that's putting you on the spot, I know. So you can
Off the
say.
top of my head, I don't know. I know a couple of years ago, there was one that hit a car and there was a claim associated with that.
Okay, thanks. Are there any other questions?
John might have some context for that.
Okay, thanks. Welcome.
Hi, I'm John Hawkridge. I'm the urban forester for the city. As far as claims, I tried to find as many or whatever I could, and I came up with 5 or 6 since I've been here 6 years. So these are, I think they're all claims for trees hitting vehicles. And one was not liquid amber. All were liquid amber trees.
Thank you.
So when it comes to pruning the tree, can you elaborate a little bit more how much you would take off? I know sometimes we have the summer limb drop on the trees. And so is that a factor as well that you have considered? And then basically, if you could explain how much would that be removed as far as shade for that house that the trees are standing?
Well, great question. Thank you. In order to remove the risk, we would have to remove the branches down to where they didn't have leaves anymore. So that the issue with the risk is really at the center of the trees where their branch attachment point is. So if it makes sense that those stems are coming out of one spot, and in order to reduce or remove risk, we have to get at the heart of the issue, which is that failure point, which is the center of the tree.
Thank you. And 2 more questions. As far as the sidewalk, is it uplifting that area, and what does that look like? The roots, rather, if it's affecting the sidewalk. And then has there been conversation with the owners, and what has been the outcome as far as, their thought process and how, that is going to affect their overall life living in that home?
That question I'm going to defer to John Hawkridge, but I'll answer the first one, which was about sidewalk damage. And actually, this location had sidewalk repair not that long ago, just from when our inspection took place.
And has it maintained, have the roots continued to cause it? Yeah.
We haven't uplifted yet, but additional issues with the tree are that roots were removed, which is a decay point, especially in the type of tree that we're looking at here. So it is an entry point for the decay to come into the tree. And that is something that we looked at, but it's difficult to assess, obviously, from above the ground. So.
And with those roots, have they entered in the home? Sometimes when there is roots intrusion, it tends to level the foundation or get it unbalanced to where it's causing issues with the sewage and could potentially cause backup.
These things happen, but we don't know. In this case, where there's no complaints about damage to foundation.
Okay, thank you.
So, as far as the property owners, when I went out to clean up the limb that fell down, the reason I went out there originally, both property owners came out, and I talked to them about the trees and the condition and the defects that I noticed on both trees. And I recommended that they apply for removal. They both seemed very concerned. One tree had a swing in it, and they were, worried my kids are on the swing all the time, and there's kids coming down the block, and they go on the tree swing here. And the other property owner is similar. He has children. He's concerned about that. So they did apply. They sent in the application, and that's what we took to pros.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions from council members? Yes.
If you were to prune it and you pruned all the leaves off and sort of ended up with these sticks coming up, would Would the leaves grow back any better, or are you just then going to have to keep?
Yeah, you would have to prune it every year in order to
Would you always have
remove-
to prune it?
Yeah,
So it would never come back to what it is now?
no,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
So what is the prune cycle on those liquid amber seed? I'm sorry, I keep.
We don't have an established pruning cycle for tree trimming. We pruned these in 2018, which is a fairly short period of time. Many cities, Berkeley, for instance, I think that their pruning cycle is 7 years. It's supposed to be 7 years, but it's more like an 8, 9, 10-year pruning cycle. So yeah, they were pruned in 2018. That all of Washington, all the liquid amber on Washington Avenue, they were pruned at the same time.
Yes.
Some of the materials we received in public comment specifically mentioned the pruning that other cities do and said it was a more proactive version than we do. Is what you're describing of basically trimming all the foliage off the tree what other cities are doing when they're doing proactive pruning, or is that a different sort of process that we're talking about?
No, proactive pruning generally refers to, at least in the context that I'm aware of, that language being used would be referring to pruning cycles. So if you are grid pruning, right, you have certain grids of the city that you're pruning in, and every tree within that grid gets pruned in year 1, year 2, it's the next grid, blah, 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 going on. That is generally considered a proactive pruning program. Whereas a reactive pruning program is where you go out and prune the tree based on a failure or something like that. So you're reacting to the situation, whereas the proactive is pruning it so that it doesn't fail in the future.
And you're saying that that sort of proactive pruning would not be sufficient for these trees?
Not for these trees. These trees are beyond the point at which they're safe in the right-of-way, at least based on the condition that I saw.
Okay. And then another question, I'm glad you talked about cutting off the one stem on, I think, the tree at
1331.
Thank you. Because to my non-arborist mind, I was like, well, what if we cut that off? And you're saying that that would then make the tree unsafe, but that was the tree that you identified one high-risk fault for, which was that limb. So you're saying that the other two stems would essentially develop a different sort of high risk, maybe in the other direction on the sidewalk?
That's correct, yes. If you think about a cylinder, when you start to cut into the cylinder in and of itself, even if there's decay all the way in the middle of the tree, it kind of doesn't matter because the cylinder is very, very strong. That shape is very, very strong. So that's essentially the idea with a tree as well. But if you start to cut into that cylinder, you start to really weaken the cylinder and the shape there. And especially if you get to a third. Once you get to a third, all bets are off and failure is pretty much imminent at that point.
Okay,
At least based on the research.
So you're saying the chance of that is all but certain?
It's likely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So if the trees are removed, are we replacing them with a different tree?
Yes, any tree that we remove, we replace.
Okay.
And where it was an inappropriate tree previously, we try to pick a better species for the future.
Now, as we know that the liquid ambers are problems, I mean, what is the proactive method the city could take to make sure that, we are addressing them, making sure they're being pruned on a cycle, and if there's more that need to be replaced, what are we, what would be the challenge or the protocol to make sure that we're embracing those? Am I off the title? Okay, I'm sorry. I'll stop.
So if you don't mind, you guys are doing it already. You passed an item tonight where you're going to do an inventory. That's the first step in getting a proactive maintenance program in place. So you can't manage what you don't know you have. So once you get that in place, then you'll know where you have trees in poor condition that need to be addressed. Once you have that information, then you can start to have a proactive maintenance program.
Thank you.
ask a question?
Yes.
I'll start, Mala will probably jump in. As we replace these or any trees, instead of starting out with a little tiny tree that's like this big, can we plant a larger tree to kind of move the process forward faster?
I'll take that. The industry standard is to use a 15-gallon tree, and the reasons being is that a smaller tree is more fragile and less likely to survive vandalism, whatever. It's not strong enough to take hold. A larger tree, studies show that a larger size tree, in 10 years, a 15-gallon compared to a 24-inch box tree will be about the same height. Typically, the 15-gallon box will be stronger, have stronger growth. It's the right size to adapt to the native soil. A larger size tree has been growing in a different medium for a longer period of time, and it's used to that soil structure. And we could, but my experience, and we have one in the city where we planted a 24-inch, and it's not doing as well as the 15 gallons that we.
Okay, thank you.
So.
I'll just offer, I've observed that anecdotally with the coast. Live oaks in my neighborhood, the ones that were from nursery versus acorn, they got outpaced by the ones from acorn just, within a few years. It's pretty amazing. Are there any other questions? I mean, I certainly sympathize with wanting to go there to the systematic question, future agenda item we can bring back. So with that, if there's no more questions, then we'll go to the appellant's presentation. And actually, City Clerk, I'll watch the clock, so you don't need to start the time.
I'd like to reserve a few minutes after my initial talk. I'm here tonight to urge you to pause and not rush to judgment on the fate of these trees. I ask you to consider the following points. Everyone agrees that these trees are healthy. Even their risk report states they are. They have a full, vigorous canopy and foliage, and I don't understand why we're chopping down healthy trees. Now, the person who thought these trees were diseased was Mr. Hawkwich, and he told the property owners who reluctantly agreed that these trees should be removed. I spoke to these property owners, and they told me that they loved their trees. They were very reluctant to have them removed, but they were told by Mr. Hawkwich that they were diseased, and therefore had them removed. They agreed to having them removed. I'm just a person, just a citizen. I don't have like a whole organization behind me. I hired at my own expense a tree specialist who analyzed the trees, took a sample, cultured it, and determined that the trees were not diseased. All of a sudden, we're not talking about diseased trees anymore. We're talking about structural damage. And I have to say, I had no notice of this report. It was sprung on me. It was not given to me. I had no notice of the staff report either. So this is all new, and I'm supposed to respond to this. And that's really unfair. The other thing I have to say is that the removal of these trees was initiated by Hawkwich, and it was on a non-emergency basis. That meant he did not think these trees were in imminent danger of falling on anybody. None of that. Because if he had believed that, he would have removed them on an emergency basis, I would assume. So there was no danger, there's no danger of imminent harm coming from these trees. The risk report that the city paid for, and I'd like to know how much that cost, by the way, because I had to pay out of my own pocket. You can tell me that later, I don't want to waste my time on this. There's no discussion of any possible mitigation. The whole mitigation thing by the risk assessment people was just like dropped on us again. It was not in the report. There was no information in the report on pruning the tree, that the crown would be lost. I had my liquid amber tree pruned all the way down to the stems by PG&E. It was in full bloom and leaf and foliage 2 or 3 years later. So that's my experience, but I'm not an arborist, and that's just, my point. Two independent arborists have said that these trees can be pruned. 2 independent arborists, despite the structural damage. That's noteworthy. The report states that the danger of a tree hitting a person is very low. To my knowledge, no person in Albany has ever been hit by a falling tree. It's all cars, and I guess we're supposed to have car insurance for that. So that's just a red herring. The theory that liquid amber trees are subject to sudden limb drop is totally unscientific. There's no scientific evidence that proves that point. All trees are subject to sudden limb drop. People speculate, scientists speculate that it's due to drought or bacterial infection. There's no such thing as liquid amber trees being subject. I have not seen any evidence to that point. As to the other points, the council is aware that the notice on the trees was effective. That's not a typo. That cannot be eliminated by giving notice, a correct notice to the neighbors. That was on the tree for the public to see. The public was misinformed that the owners appealed. They did not appeal. So many people may not have thought it was necessary to show up here today because the owners would take care of that. So that's another problem. And the Zoom notice is just ridiculous. It's dead. It doesn't work. So many people may not have been able to contact you because the Zoom notice doesn't work. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's 18 pages long. Nobody can even type it in. Anyway, on a personal level, I'm just appalled that this is a green city. We have all these statements on the website, how we're green, how we love our trees, how we want to protect them and save them. And then one person gets to decide whether to chop down these trees. The Park and Rec Commission agrees, and the City Council agrees. And I, as a private citizen, have to hire my own experts at my own, expense to come here and argue with you guys. And it's appalling. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the appellant?
I do. So, can you please? Yes. Thank you so much for providing your information. So it sounds like there was some type of drop, I guess, in communication about this meeting. Is that correct?
I don't know what that was. I was just not given the risk report. I was not given any of this information in the staff report. And so I discovered the risk report when I looked at the website, although the city manager, when I contacted her, promised me that I would be given all the new evidence and all the reports. That was never done. I never received any of that. And that is unfair. And you should not be able to make this decision without me hiring my own risk assessment report expert, again, at my own expense, to contradict this person. I have no idea who she is. I have no idea why a different risk assessment person would not contradict her and say these trees can be pruned. Both of our arborists say these trees can be pruned. I've never heard of a pruning that cuts off the entire tree. That's just ridiculous. And this is like an expert, and she comes here, and everybody goes, yes, of course, she's an expert. Hawkridge is an expert. Whatever he says goes. He initiates all these removals. He's the only person who does that. There's no review of his actions. Everybody in the Park and Rec Commission just says, oh, John, you're doing a great job. Just too bad. These liquid, we have hundreds of liquid amber trees. According to Hawkridge, they all need to come down because they're inappropriate trees. And then he replaces them with these maple trees that take 20 years to mature. They grow 1 foot a year. They're slow-growing trees. There's one across the street from me that was planted. 6 years ago, I can go over there and break that tree in half. It's so weak. Half of the trees that he's replanted are dead. Drive down Marin. All the trees he's planted are dead. Nobody waters these trees, nobody maintains them, nobody prunes them, nobody waters them. That's what the tree plan is for this city of Albany. Now we're having a master tree plan where we're identifying these trees, and that is happening. I've been told by Jeff Bond that's happening. But, why can't we stop cutting down these trees till we have a master plan? And why can this one person initiate the destruction of all these trees? There are 24 trees that have been destroyed in the past 4 years, according to his own statement, since 2016. It costs up to $4,000 per tree to destroy these trees. Couldn't that money be used to prune? Why doesn't he establish a pruning program? Why doesn't that come to the city? Why don't we have that? So anyway, that's a long answer. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Are there any other questions? With that, we will open public comment. So those who would like to speak can go ahead and line up by the podium or just wait and stand up. And there are 2 participants who have raised their hands, so we'll alternate virtually, so we'll alternate back and forth. So if you welcome back, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I was wondering what the nesting season is for Albany. What months are we not supposed to cut down trees? What months is it illegal by the state of California to cut down trees? Is it, I looked on Google, but they're all different. Is it February 1st through August 15th? Is it, I don't know. And I'm surprised that wasn't stated in the report today. And also, when was the last bird nest study done? During the presentation, it was stated that a visual assessment from the ground was taken. And I'm just wondering what the eyesight, the hindsight of that individual person is. Do they wear corrective vision? Do they wear glasses? Are there any photos of the tree proving that there's no bird nests in there? Because all over the internet, it's illegal to cut down a tree if there's one bird nest in there. So, I don't know. I always attend these Parks and Recs meetings, and I'm usually the only public comment, and I'm always saying to not cut down trees because we need more trees in our air to make more oxygen. We've all seen that movie Ferngully, right? And it just seems like nobody really cares about the trees. So where's the bird nest study? Where's the photos to prove that there's no birds nesting in the trees? What months is nesting season? I know it's wintertime now, so maybe it's legal to cut down trees. Seems like we're having this meeting during that time. And the arborist stated that, yeah, we're going to replace a tree, but he never said what kind. He just said appropriate trees. But it would be kind of nice to know what those trees are. I mean, public comment stated possibly maple, but we didn't get any feedback from the city staff about what the species of tree actually is. Oak tree, pine tree, is it going to be a maple? And I saw in the picture with the canker, the red line was more of a vertical cut, but you don't really cut limbs off like that. You really cut them horizontally where the diameter is the smallest. So it seemed kind of like a really long oval, which kind of seems inaccurate. You would actually cut it horizontally to where the diameter is smaller. It's kind of an inaccurate photo. And so my suggestion is to keep the tree, both of them, and then just cut off possibly some of the stems or to prune them and not the whole tree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Julia.
Hi, thank you. I just want to add that I also am feeling perplexed about the urgency for completely cutting down these 2 trees. I'm seeing that they are in good health with some structural issues that feel like they should be able to be addressed at the points of poor attachment by trimming. These are big, beautiful trees that can live to be up to 150 years old. They would outlive all of us. And they are habitats, especially trees this size. Older trees store more carbon than young trees, and it just feels so antithetical to be cutting down trees that do not seem to be an imminent threat when there are other communities that are struggling to plant trees, right? When there are other communities that are are dearth of trees, and when we're in the middle of a climate crisis. It just is not, it's just not adding up for me. So one issue is these two particular trees. Maybe if we have to cut one down, maybe we could save one of them. You know, do they both have to go? Are they both under the same condition? It just does not feel, it just feels like something's missing here. I would also be curious to know what it costs to replace and replant a tree of this size, how long it takes to get back to the size where it's producing this full benefit. Yeah, and so that's the one thing. The other side is just this broader system question of what is the plan for Albany's liquid ambers. Now that I'm aware of this issue, I feel like I see them everywhere I go. It feels like the majority of tree cover in Albany is these beautiful liquid ambers. And so it's a major concern to me that we do not seem to have a plan for maintaining these trees and making sure that we maintain the tree cover and the habitat and the climate benefit and all these things that they provide. So I would really love to know what the broader plan for the liquid ambers are. And just hope that we can take a step back and not destroy any trees that don't really need to die. Thank you.
Larry Lee.
Hello, my name is Larry Lee. I'm the appellant's husband, and I agree with everything she said. I urge the City Council to establish a moratorium on cutting these trees until we can really have a more regularized process for determining which trees need to be killed. I feel like the process is opaque and confusing, and that leads to unfairness. This is supposed to be an appeal. An appeal should be based on the evidence that was presented before the Park and Rec Commission. All of a sudden, there's all this new evidence dropped late. The appellant doesn't have time to marshal her resources to counter this evidence. There's also in the packet, there's evidence, new evidence of limb drops that we didn't know about, that we haven't had a chance to go talk to the people there. I wonder why we don't have a citizens committee for trees like El Cerrito and many other communities have. And I feel like we should have a moratorium on killing these trees until we have a master tree plan in place. Regarding the two trees here on Washington Avenue, I really don't like these danger and scare tactics. There's some suggestion that the residents have been scared by the threat of liability. And I question that. Do we have the city attorney here? If a tree limb drops, unless there's evidence of negligence on the part of the city has no liability. That's just an act of God. That would just be like a meteor falling out of the sky. But in any case, there's no really good evidence that there's disease. We heard about a canker, but the appellant hired somebody who took a sample of the tree, cultured it in the lab, and found no evidence of disease. So I don't know why we're talking about disease. I feel like there's been insufficient weight placed on factors other than safety, such as the shade, the beauty, the enhanced property values, the climate issues, and the carbon capture of these trees. I think there's been a failure to explore alternatives to cutting, that is killing these trees, such as pruning. I think it is true that if all we're talking about is risk and the cost to the city, we should cut down all trees because that would mean the risk is zero. But I think we can all agree we can live with some risk here. And one of my concerns is when I went to listen to the Park and Rec on Zoom, It started out Mr. Hawker's talking about his dislike of liquid amber as being inappropriate, but then it started talking about disease, and then now we're talking about structural issues. So these changing rationales undermine confidence in his views on this, and I really think we need to just slow down, have a moratorium on killing these large, decades-old trees until we can get a handle on this problem. I feel like we need to see who's liable if something falls, and what is the city's plan for all the rest of these trees? Thank you.
Thank you.
After David Blum, it'll be Bob Cipher in the room. Go ahead, David.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I 100% support the appellant. And I say there's no way we're cutting down these trees. There was all this talk about risk. There wasn't a definition of how much. Of course, there's risk to everything. There's trees all over the place. There's trees where roots pop out and they push up the sidewalk. They're not liquid ambers. It's the same for any tree. There are trees where branches fall on cars and things, not liquid amber trees. So I don't know what the risk is. Is the risk that these two trees on Washington are going to fall down tomorrow and like smash somebody's car? Or is the risk that, okay, a branch could fall off sometime in the next 20 to 100 years? You know, the risk was not defined. But besides that, based on what the appellant presented today, there's no way you can make a decision to cut these trees down because the appellant had contradictory evidence to what was presented by the city. And this is one of the most beautiful streets in Albany. And my wife and I, we don't live there, but we walk by there almost every day for the last several years, and I have not been hit by a branch. I have not tripped on a sidewalk, but we've enjoyed walking up those several blocks, on Washington, where there's just big, beautiful trees everywhere. And I say there's no way you can cut those trees down.
And yeah, for the climate.
And of course, we need more trees, actually. We can't be cutting trees down. We need more mature trees. Whatever you put there is not going to replace what we have right now. It's going to be a big empty space, and you might have a little tree that's going to take 20, 30, 40 years before anything fills out that space. And I'd say absolutely not. We're not cutting down those trees. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Cipher.
Thanks for letting me speak tonight. I'm Bob Cipher. I'm a homeowner.
It's your right.
Yeah. Here's my full disclosure. I stand outside most mornings in my pajamas. We're in our pajamas, Ingrid and I, and we rake our leaves. My wife and I have planted 9 trees on our property. We have them pruned and trimmed every 3 years, so to mitigate any risk and to keep them looking as healthy and as sharp as they should look. When we bought our home in '97, within 2 years, we noticed that the city of Albany came around and pruned and trimmed our trees. And every 2 or 3 years, they came around again. It was amazing. And our direct street tree is in beautiful condition because of that aesthetic pruning and trimming. And we don't have that program anymore. It's not there. And that's a disservice to our large canopy trees. Washington Avenue has lost 8 or 9 trees already, large canopy trees. That's 300-400 years it took those trees to grow to full maturity. And they're gone, and you can't replace that. Someone asked if we could plant larger trees. I've heard, well, they're not available at the nursery. The Home Depot in San Rafael has 15, 20-foot trees available all the time for $400. Moon Valley Nursery in Santa Rosa will sell you a 20-foot tree, a 30-foot tree, a 40-foot tree, a 50-foot tree, and they'll plant it. You introduced this new tree risk assessment today, and I'm just gonna repeat that without notifying us, that didn't allow us to respond appropriately, and I find that to be unacceptable. I think that any action on the Washington Street trees should be suspended until the arborists that we hired as neighbors can fully respond to the tree risk assessment. The arborists that we paid for ourselves and had come and look at these trees, they have 25 plus years. One of them served the East Bay for 40 years. They deserve to be heard as well. The International Society of Arborists consistently stresses tree risk mitigation via aesthetic pruning and trimming. Consistently stresses that, with tree removal as an absolute last resort. The ISA also states worrying about hazards has resulted in the unnecessary removal of many trees. Although hazards in trees need to be addressed, removal must again be an act of last resort. Instead, technical knowledge, common sense, and prudent aesthetic tree maintenance are the keys to preventing injuries, property damage, and safety issues. Both Washington Avenue trees can be aesthetically, professionally trimmed, pruned, and even cabled and thrive for decades. All of our independent arborists have stated that. Is that telling me I'm done?
That is what that is.
Is that what that means?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I'm done.
Thank you.
Thanks.
After Chris Rockwell will be Natalie Ballett. Go ahead, Chris.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
There first. Okay. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late to the meeting. I am a homeowner of one of the trees on Washington Street where the removal is being considered. I want to start by saying that we've lived here for, I think, 17 years, and we love the tree. However, one night I was sitting and reading, and a very large branch spontaneously fell off the tree. The next day, the branch was removed, and shortly thereafter, I met with John Hockenridge. To me, the tree issue is one of safety. You've all spoken about how much you like to walk on this street, and so do lots of children and people. And to me, as I said, safety is the #1 issue. And I could not live with myself if something happened and a large branch fell from the tree and somebody was injured. So as much as we love this tree, and it sounds like a lot of people in the community do also, I feel that safety is the #1 issue. So that's where I stand, and I think that's about all I have to say. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. If I may ask, if you're still there, I don't know if you are.
I'm here.
Okay. Are you at 1431 or 1433, if you're willing to say, which you may not be?
I am 1431.
Okay. Thank you very much. Hello.
Hello, my name is Natalie Villette, and I've been a homeowner in Albany for 25 years as of last month. And one of the reasons that we chose to live here was for the trees. Before moving to Albany, we lived in San Francisco, which is a very under-treed, under-forested city, and I worked with Friends of the Urban Forest to get funding to plant trees. And street trees, the little ones, are very delicate, and I've been noticing, and they need water. I mean, that's a big part of when you're planting new trees, you need to make sure that there are going to be people there to water the trees and give them 5 gallons once a week for a year. And unless that happens, that tree isn't going to grow. So it's great that you're planting trees, and we need to know that you're going to take care of them, especially as we're losing trees. So I also wanted just to recognize some of the benefits of the trees, and these statistics primarily come from the International Society of Arborists, and the City of Albany's urban forestry webpage. Neighborhoods with established trees are 7 to 9 degrees cooler overall. Street trees increase property values between 12 and 20%. Trees absorb all kinds of toxins and pollutants and clean the air for us. And now that California officially has a fire season, this seems especially important. Forested neighborhoods are up to 40% quieter as trees absorb urban traffic sounds. Trees decrease energy costs by about 25%, protecting homes from excessive heat, cold, and wind. Trees help water infiltration into the soil, thereby reducing flooding, which apparently is going to be an issue for California. It's hard to believe because we've had so many droughts, but with climate change, flooding is the next thing we need to worry about, and trees are here to help with that. Trees provide habitats to dwindling wildlife populations, and the point was already made that any tree with a nest is not liable for removal. Green neighborhoods support mental and physical health as well, and that's all the people that enjoy taking walks and being in the trees, around the trees and breathing well. The more trees in urban areas, the lower the crime rate. So they're also protectors for us in that way. And there's been a lot about talk about responsibility and who's responsible, and I think it's important to also be responsible for the planet and the future generations. Keep the trees, or at least wait until you have a plan.
Thank you.
After Julia Frank would be Joe Grissom. Go ahead, Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia Chang Frank, and I've been a Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commissioner since 2017. Since the Washington trees are actually within 500 feet radius of my house, I wasn't able to vote on this item when it was before the commission. So I'm not really speaking in my role as commissioner, but as a neighbor who values the aesthetic and climate mitigation benefits of mature trees with large canopies. So I, first of all, just want to say I strongly urge the city council to vote against removal and instead direct staff to prune the trees so they can be saved. But in my role as commissioner, I was part of a subcommittee several years ago to look at the city's tree removal policy. And as part of that subcommittee, I interviewed arborists throughout the cities in the Bay Area. One particular person I talked to was Dan Gallagher, the urban forester for the city of Berkeley. And he told me that if a limb falls from a liquid amber in Berkeley, they do not automatically cut down the trees. Instead, they actually proactively prune the tree and all the liquid amber is pretty much in the neighborhood of those trees to reduce the risk of another limb failure. So additionally, so I just wanted to make that point. And that given that the trees in Albany haven't been trimmed in a systematic way for, it sounds like 4 years, we are likely at risk for additional limb failure from other mature trees because we're not properly maintaining the trees. And as a commissioner, I don't want to be in a position of having to remove a tree just because we haven't taken preventative measures to care for them. So I urge you, one, to vote to not remove the Washington trees, and instead direct staff to prune these trees and other mature trees in Albany so that we can reduce the risk of limb failure. Also, I urge you to provide staff with the resources they need to prune the trees instead of having our public works budget go towards cutting down the trees. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe Grissom. Joe here?
Joe Grissom?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm hearing impaired. Thank you. Hi, I kind of came late to this issue, but I have a friend and he's a retired arborist from UC Berkeley. We went and looked at the trees this morning, and he said that, I'm going to tell you exactly what he said. He said that the first tree at 1433, he felt it was problematic. But he did say some interesting things about 1431. He said that he believed that with doing the pruning, including the bifurcated trunk thing, that was a viable thing to do, and that if you did a resistograph test to ensure that the density of the tree itself was strong, which he believed it was, there would be no reason to remove that tree. He believed that pruning would not eviscerate the canopy. Proper pruning would be eliminating the tree branches that have a great horizontal layering, which they actually shouldn't, not that much, but also pointed upwards. I'm a rookie, excuse me. So I'm just winging it here. And he said if you just did a consistent maintenance and oversight of the tree, there would be no reason to kill it. I think that we're all culpable because we have let revenues run out instead of maintaining all of our trees in Albany, and so many of them can experience sudden branch drop. The oak, the beech, the elm, the eucalyptus, sycamore, all of them, it's not just liquid amber. So trees are a risk because a living thing is a risk, but a tree is alive. And more than ever, we need to respect our living things. I don't think there's anybody in this room who would willingly want to kill a tree when it isn't necessary. And if it's about money, then let's galvanize and start creating a revenue stream straight into the heart of keeping Albany green. I know that if there are people like me, and I suspect that there are, we'll pound the pavements and we'll advocate for more revenues for maintaining our trees. Seen too many trees go down. I'm 67 years old and I'm carrying buckets of recycled water down to city trees, virgin olive trees down on my block on Adams Street. It's a privilege to help keep them alive because the people that are responsible aren't. And they're already dying, and they were only newly planted about a year ago. Anyway, thank you, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Brian Beal, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. This is Brian Beal. I actually am the chair of the Parks, Recreation, and Open Spaces Commission. And just first of all, as chair, I wanted to give a summary of some background to help out with this discussion. Number one, street tree removals have become more controversial recently. The sidewalk repair programs triggered a number of city-initiated applications, which are normally initiated by the homeowner. And I think this has caused blowback in the process because it's not clear what the homeowner opinion is, and because all the removable trees on a block are being hit at once. So that's kind of the background. We have to serve the whole city. The interested parties, in this case, there are 4 interested parties, which makes it complicated. There's the adjacent homeowner, the city government, the public, and the block neighbors. And on this liability issue, well, it's known that these trees are hazardous, and therefore they are a liability. And so the city, make no question about it, you can ask the attorney, the city's got liability, and so does the homeowner. And this is a little complicated because the city owns the property, and the homeowner is being stuck with the liability for it and has the most impact. So I, for one, typically give the city and the homeowner the biggest priority. But that said, if we did these tree removals as a group instead of individually, I think the homeowners would get more weight. Now, this is a public right-of-way, and it's typically is 2 feet inside the sidewalk. To the point about the health of the trees, they need more space. So some ideas might be to reclaim some of that 2 feet, or maybe we could one-way some of these streets. But other than that, what I would say is there should be more of and this is my personal opinion, there should be more consultation with the neighbors about the street tree products as a whole. And the planning should be involved. The separation between removal and planning is leading to a lot of reservations. And I think a block party would be the ideal format to neighbors to discuss this. And the city should consider spreading the removals around the city and not doing a lot in the same block. The city-sponsored application should provide a written statement from the homeowner, pro or con. With this appeal, the one merit I possibly saw was the homeowner's opinion, and they seem to be, one at least, is indicating they were in favor of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aaron?
This is the most unusual appeal I've ever experienced. I don't know really what's going on here. I have a presentation and that you're going to put up. So, look, this is a really difficult decision. I understand. I saw what was just presented. So one of the reasons I think this is so unusual is that in an appeal there was some new evidence that wasn't even in the record, the written record before tonight. Somebody on the lines that this doesn't, something doesn't add up, and something doesn't add up. Just removal, when we have an asset like our tree canopy, removal should be the last resort, not the first. And it seems like there are a lot of citizens that like trees and love trees, and we don't want them cut down, and so we're thinking that this is wrong, but you've heard an expert come up here. But this has been the first resort, and the only way to see that is to see what's happened over the last year. So this is the block that I live on. This is Washington, within a few hundred feet of my street. This was the last Google Earth picture, and then please, next slide. This is what's happened in the last year or so. I hope my time doesn't get taken up if I can't get through slides. Okay, these are all the trees that have been removed basically in the last year. And it's always 2 at a time. One has a little issue, 2 come out, and it can't be, like, I understand if a tree has to be removed, it hurts all of us, but we have to do it for safety. But it can't be that they're always removed. There are 2 others that were removed last week that aren't on this, that aren't here in the immediate vicinity. These would be number 9 and 10. Please, next. This was my neighborhood before. Next. This is what it looks like now. Next, please. This was my neighborhood last year. Next. And this is what it looks like now. Please, next. This tree is, I can see from my corner. By the way, can you see the notice? It's right there. That's the public notice. It's easy to miss. That's before. Next. After. You get the point. There are 3 others that I didn't put up here. Please, next. These are the 2 trees that are before us. They are healthy. Even the report says they're healthy and vibrant. We have 2 arborists that submitted reports saying that they can be saved. Another one apparently tonight. So when I said something doesn't add up, something doesn't add up. Please, next. The arborist Peter Rudy said about these trees, if the tree has enough value, you don't just remove them, you manage them. Next. He was surprised, let's move on to the next. He was surprised that the report didn't talk about saving the trees. If these trees were lightened and clean and cabled, they could be kept safe and healthy. Can I get 10 more seconds? Because, please, next. I just want to say these trees could be kept safe and healthy. That's not my opinion. That's from a professional arborist. It's 2 professional arborists, 3. These can be kept safe and healthy. I know it's a difficult decision to go against staff, but at some point, we need to make decisions to save the trees. Please pause any removals until we get through a city tree plan. Nobody wants to put anybody at risk, but at some point we need to say, if we can save trees, we can, and these trees can be kept safe and healthy. These trees can be kept safe and healthy. Thank you.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, hi, this is Nick Peterson. I'm a resident of Albany, and I'm also on the Climate Action Committee. The tree issue is really a big one, and we do need more mature trees in Albany with climate changing, more hot days, and is actually an integral part of the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan to increase the tree canopy in Albany, not decrease it. One thing I get a little concerned about is if the city brings in paid consultants to advise them, that consultant has a liability too. So they're going to want to reduce their own risk to almost zero. So they're going to be pretty motivated to make a very safe recommendation that makes sure that the risk is small. So the level of risk, I think, needs to be evaluated and taken into effect too. And hopefully that's being done. So the tree master plan is something that grew out of what the Climate Action Committee suggested. We actually just said, let's get out there, let's plant more climate relevant, since our climate is changing, big trees that will become large and help shade our streets. And we wanted to just start a program that did that rather quickly, but of course, you got to study these things for a while. So we're doing the tree master plan, which I'm really glad we are doing. I wish it was happening more quickly. So again, the other thing I worry about is I see a lot of trees coming into Albany along the street program. Thank you, Mayor Jordan, for pushing through that there was no charge, that the Measure DD funds would pay for new street trees. But I see those trees going, and they're really tiny, and then they're neglected. I was down at Peggy Thompson Park recently, and half the trees down there are dead. So there's really not the little tiny trees that go in and then 10 years later are barely 10 feet tall. We don't want those. We want big shade trees. So I would love to, when the master tree plan comes out, hear about what species we will be putting in that will then allow for this canopy to really grow and give us a city that's more resilient to increased temperatures. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Brian.
Hi, my name is Brian Martin. I'm a commissioner on the Parks and Rec Commission, but I'm speaking as a private resident. I live about a half a block from the bowling alley, and I was recused from a meeting last year about this time where the city was deciding on, the commission was deciding on maybe 20 or 30 trees, some of the most established trees with the largest canopies that were all slated to be removed. And that's for the bowling alley project. And so I would just want to point out equity issues here where we didn't have anybody. It's mostly a lot of renters in my neighborhood and not a lot of people that nobody stepped up to pay for studies on the trees, and there weren't lines of people to speak for the trees, and so I would just ask the city council to and the people doing the project said, well, we're going to plant as many, if not more, trees back, and it was passed unanimously by everyone who was on the commission last year, and so that was so that would be my point, is to factor in how these kinds of situations are assessed regardless of neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
That's it. Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment before we close the public comment portion of the public hearing? Not seeing anybody here or there. We will close that part of the public hearing and bring it back to council.
I have a question regarding the report from the residents. Is there any reason why we did not give them time to, with the arborists that they work with, to present something to us today?
Give them, I'm sorry,
So
which
they
arborist? The arborist that they hired?
They're arborists, yes.
I think that's a different question than
That's
you're
a different
asking
question, but okay, if you want to answer that, but I think I heard them say that, you know, they wanted time to have the arborists come out based on the information that was presented, so they can have their assessment to be a part of the decision-making process. So my question is there a reason why we did not get that information so we can at least have both to make a complete informative decision on whether to keep the tree or not to keep the trees?
Yeah, I will defer that to staff in terms of the process of information exchange.
So we commissioned the independent study just to make sure that we were seeing things correctly, and we put it out per our normal process of posting agendas, items, and it, quite frankly, we didn't finish it much sooner than posting it on the agenda. In hindsight, I don't think there was any issue. We weren't trying to hide it from anybody, and if looking back, we probably would have given it to them earlier.
Okay. Wait.
To correct the record on that, an email was sent to the appellant with a link to the agenda on November 2nd with the staff report and the accompanying report from your presenting arborist.
So if that was sent on the 2nd, today is the 7th, right? In order to give someone to hire someone to come out based on their time. I mean, I just think that in all fairness, it's just like when you go into court, right? If one is presented, you want to give a person the next time to present their argument in order for the judge to make a decision. So I think it would have been feasible if we did give them at least at the minimum 10 to 15 days to come back with, here is what our arborist said, and then that way we would have had enough information to make a decision. So I question that. And I just think that we're moving too fast without all the information presented before us. But that's just my opinion based off of what I've heard from the residents, what I've heard from the staff. I think in order for us to make an informative decision on whether to prune or extract the tree, we need to hear all sides, need to make sure everything is in writing. That way we can use the comparables to move forward. And that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Yes.
I've got some other comments and questions that were brought up by public comment, but just to address the process question, which I am sensitive to, I want to just offer that I think from the staff report, our policy says something about that an appeal of this nature has to be heard at the next possible council meeting. Am I getting that right? So it may be the right thing to give more time for this to happen, but I don't want to blame staff for trying to follow the policy and having this come to the closest possible council meeting, which is our written policy on this. We may decide that more time should be given to address that new information that came out, but I want to acknowledge that the policy as we have it right now says that we're trying to do this at the next possible meeting in the, a reasonable timeline.
So let me be clear. No one's blaming staff. I'm just asking a question. Why are we not giving the residents time to present information? I understand there's policies, procedures, and rules that we have to follow, but at the end of the day, I think the residents that live on that street, none of us live on that street, so we don't have a clue what's going on. They are our voices, and they're bringing this to us. We're listening to the staff, and I think it would have been appropriate for both of us, all of us, to have all the information presented.
Thank you. Any comment from council members McQuaid or Nason?
No, not right now.
Okay. You're leaning in. I don't know if that means you want to comment or not.
Well, we're, I feel satisfied with the information that has been presented. We're not arborists, and we're not a panel of experts kind of, looking at at dueling theories about how to save trees. We're applying our policies. Clearly, we have homeowners who want these trees removed. And, there's been some muddying of the waters around that issue, but it seems from tonight's hearing and the information in our packets that, yes, the tree owners view these trees as dangerous and they don't want to bear that danger. And I think that is a very, very powerful factor in the balancing of the pros and cons here. That's established. Whether there is a theoretical possibility of saving the trees, that seems like the kind of thing that reasonable professionals could disagree about. But the question really is, do we impose that danger on the homeowners in order to pursue that possibility? That's how I'm seeing it.
Wait, hold on. I'm sorry. Pardon me. You can't talk now. You're not allowed to talk now. You're not allowed to talk now.
She can't hear you.
Well,
She can't hear you. You have to get in front of her.
So,
She can't hear. You have to.
I'm leaving. Sorry, folks, I just forgot to add that when I had extra time.
Yeah, she can't hear.
Apologies. But it's a complete misrepresentation.
pardon me.
I've talked to them. Or him. I'm sorry, thank you.
I'm going to follow on what Councilmember Nason stated, which is that we did receive sorry, I'm a little rattled. I haven't had to do that before. I apologize. Get back to my notes.
Could I jump in just for a second?
Yes, please.
Give you a little breathing time.
Yeah, thanks.
I was thinking similar to what Councilmember Nason said, that it's interesting to me that the two people that are most impacted by this are the only two people that have actually said they're concerned about it. And I do think our decision's should be weighted a little bit in that direction. I honestly have not yet decided what I'm going to vote in the end, but I think the homeowner has more skin in the game here. And I want to be respectful of their feelings and their concerns.
So how can we save these trees? I think I understand your point as far as the homeowners, their concern on safety. There's no factual evidence based on what the presentation stated that the tree limbs have caused damage. There were 3 scenarios that it might happen, but it hasn't happened. For example, in front of my property, where I live now currently, the tree limb has fell, it has been pruned, but 2 days later, here recently, limbs fell again, right? So to my knowledge, that tree is healthy. Right, and so the question is, how can we save it where it's a win-win for the community, right? We understand that the 2 residents that live there, their concerns, but we're looking more of the community and what's best for all of us, right? So instead of just extracting, let's see how we can save it. If we can start pruning now and then have regular maintenance and kind of watch those trees to see if, there's a reoccurring theme going on, then maybe bring it back and say, okay, here's what we've noticed over the past maybe year or so. This is what happens. I think it's time for us to move forward. And those are just my suggestions, but I think to go and aggressively move the trees, especially after the presentation the man presented, it's like we're just wiping out trees, and I understand the safety concern. But if we can save it at any point, just prune it just a bit and watch it, I think that would be best, especially for the climate change initiative that we have in place for the city. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. I'm going to return back to Councilmember Nason's referencing one of the adjacent property owners. We received a letter from another owner. I can only presume it was the other owner, but you'll see why I'm presuming that yesterday. So this is fresh from them. One of the trees recommended for removal is in front of our house. We understand that various arborists have differing opinions about the health of this tree. What is certain is that recently a large branch fell and it could have killed someone. It wasn't even windy that day. Our kids and their friends have to walk under this tree to get to our house. We love this tree, but it is clearly a danger. For the sake of safety, the tree needs to come down. We are afraid of its potential every day. A beautiful, safe tree will be planted in its place. We do not understand how certain neighbors who are not threatened by this tree many times a day can try to force the city to keep this hazard. We understand that in case of injury, we would be potentially liable along with the city. Please uphold the previous decision to remove this tree. We withhold our names and are not attending the meeting because of the vehemence and threatening tone some neighbors have expressed in regards to the removal of this tree. That's been a surprise in what we had always thought of as a supportive Albany environment. I want to read a section of Albany's code. This regards trees. This is Chapter 14, 1.4, Paragraph A. The owner of a lot fronting on or adjacent to any portion of a street shall cause to have maintained any trees, shrubs, hedges, or other landscaping along said street or within the street right-of-way adjacent to his or her property in such non-dangerous condition that the trees, shrubs, hedges, or other landscaping will not interfere with public convenience or safety in the use of the streets and sidewalks. No maintenance to any tree within the public right-of-way may be performed without first obtaining an encroachment permit from the city. So these adjacent property owners, by our code, are responsible for these trees. I am confused by the appellant's statement that there was no mention of structural defects of these trees prior to tonight, or prior to the information for tonight. A reading from the staff report that was presented to the Parks, Rec, and Open Space Commission regarding the tree at 1431. Inspection of this tree revealed several defects that indicate the continued probability of continued limb failure. This tree is structurally unsound, as seen in several tight branching unions with included bark, as well as many diagonally extending limbs. And then regarding the tree at 1433, it has severe structural problems and an area of decay in the lower trunk. This tree has 4 codominant stems, all of which have included bark at the stem unions. Now, the appellants, one of the appellants arborists provided one paragraph report, and there was one sentence saying that these trees are no more dangerous than other trees, but there's no methodology that was presented. There's no data that's presented. There is some data regarding disease, but not about the structural issues. The other arborist said that the trees could be preserved if they were cabled. I don't know if cabling is something that is ever done in an urban forest. I can understand that's done for high-value trees sometimes. And so I'm interested in getting an opinion from staff on whether it's feasible or whether you know other cities that have cabled street trees in order to save them. It seems like that's a reasonable thing for high-value specimens to particular property owners, but I have walked hundreds of miles in these cities, and I don't recall seeing any street trees that have been cabled before. I don't think it's a feasible approach for an urban forest, but I would refer to, if I may, to staff to talk about cabling and the viability of cabling a street tree.
Sure, and I will defer to Daria if you could talk about the cabling.
Sure. I worked for a city in Southern California, and it was our policy not to cable street trees in the right-of-way because cabling is an identification that there is a defect. So we were told by the city attorney's office that once you've identified a defect, you need to mitigate the defect rather than putting the community on notice. It's a different case for parks because we don't have the same high target environment that we do in the public right-of-way, immovable high targets. In parks, you can often move park benches or move play areas away from trees that are high risk. But in the right-of-way, you have those immovable static targets that I talked about in the presentation.
Thank you. So given these factors and the fact that it's...
Mr. Mayor, I know it's not public comment. You asked, I have a picture of a cabled street tree, 1 block on Washington. Just wanted to know if they were ever there, I can submit the evidence.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Now I wonder if the adjacent property owner is willing to pay for that since they're responsible for it. It doesn't seem like they are since they're asking for the tree to be removed. So given that all the arborists, except for one who provided a one-sentence statement that these trees are no more hazardous without presentation of methodology, data, or observations, the other 3 arborists all agree that these trees are a risk unless they're cabled. That is specifically what Peter Rudy said. He said these could be pruned, these could be saved if they were pruned and cabled. The city does not have the resources to do that. I would look forward to working with you all to get those resources in the future, but we don't have those resources right now. So given the agreement of all the arborists that these trees are a hazard, I am in favor of denying the appeal. Councilmember Nason.
Yeah, that's where I'm leaning as well. I wanted to make a couple of points, and one of them is these street trees tend to be kind of even-aged little forests. You know, they're on my own block, the Liquid Ambers were all planted at the same time. There was kind of a tree planting movement that went on, and a bunch of people put in these trees. When you have basically even-aged trees, they start to die. They start to fall apart and die fairly close in time. That's not at all unusual. So I can understand the sorrow that people feel as this, you know, little forest is becoming no longer viable. But that isn't unusual. That's part of the nature of what happens when you're planting trees of the same species at the same time in a particular area. The more over looking at things from the long run, I think we need to keep in mind not that we don't want to make hosting a street tree a bad thing for homeowners. And they are a bad thing. You know, I think that any lawyer would tell people, you know, don't have a park, don't let the city put a tree in your parking strip, because you're going to have liabilities unless the city is willing to defend and indemnify you. People are taking a serious risk when they accept a street tree. We shouldn't make it worse for them. We should be working on policies that make it attractive for people to embrace a street tree. And I think requiring people to keep a tree that is a danger to their kids, you know, is about the worst thing that we could possibly do to encourage people to host trees. I would love to see the neighborhood thinking about the longer run and what the next forest should look like, which kinds of trees should be coming in, and how can you get everybody on board? On my street, there's a lot of people increasingly we see people paving their or just not planting trees. The tree, you know, the little as trees die, people are not replacing them because of the bad experiences of the people with the trees. So we need to get beyond that. We need to be thinking kind of big picture and long run. How do we get a sustainable tree canopy that really, and increase that tree canopy rather than trying to delay its deterioration and let it just decline over time.
And I'll follow on that, I mean, the situation is remarkably analogous to the situation with sidewalks, where it's on public property, it's owned by the city, and the burden of maintenance has been imposed on the adjacent property owner. And we can see how poorly that worked out. We're now experiencing that with street trees. It took me 6 years to try to change the direction of the ship of state on the sidewalks. Was finally successful with that. And following that, I started working on changing the direction of the ship of state on street trees. My ultimate goal is to have the city take full responsibility for street trees, which includes there is going to be a tree planted in this location if you're the adjacent property owner. then you can maybe say something about the species, but beyond that, there is going to be a tree here, which is not the current situation. But that's for the future, that's for 2024, and I hope to maybe work with some of you on that if you'll see fit to do so after tonight. Yes.
I'll agree with your last point of, I think, as I've said to some of the people in this room, you know, no matter how this appeal works out, this process has pointed out that there are things we probably need to address, specifically that your suggestion of who should be managing and, you know, liable for street trees. And I agree that it probably should be the city, and that's part of a process to do. Before I talk about what I think we should do tonight, there's a couple questions that came up from public comment that I want to just get an answer on, or I think I know the answer to a lot of them, but make sure it's clear. So city attorney, someone mentioned that a branch dropping is essentially an act of God. Can you confirm whether we are liable for a branch dropping or not to some extent?
I think you heard from our consultant that when you're put on notice of a defect or an issue, then it can cause a problem for the city for a dangerous condition of public property. So we already are put on notice in the sense that we have a report from both our arborist and our urban forester about concerns related to this tree.
Which was going to be my second question of, now that we've heard all of this, are we more at risk if anything were to happen?
Yes.
Thank you. I also wanted to just ask the arborist, you know, we've had a lot of discussion around the idea of good health versus disease versus structural integrity. And I wonder if they could address at all, you know, why disease was said in one of our reports and not the other, as well as what sort of these terms mean. Because to a layperson, I would say, you know, if a large part of a tree is dead and structurally unsound, that doesn't sound healthy, but it sounds like the term of art here is to say a difference between healthy and structurally sound.
So the crown of the tree is healthy, right? No one's not going to argue that the tree has healthy leaves on it. And this is kind of like the worst case scenario for a tree in a right-of-way, because we would generally refer to something like this as a widowmaker, because you can't tell from the outside that the tree has some really poor structural defects that make it really unsafe. Additionally, the weight of the crown can actually be an add to the demise of the tree. So dead trees, which don't have any leaves on them or have 100% dead leaves on them, have very little weight and actually reduce their level of failure oftentimes because all the leaves are brown and there's no water in the tree, and that reduces the weight, which reduces the likelihood of failure. So in terms of, you have to repeat your question, I apologize.
I think you got most of it, of the difference between healthy and structurally sound, though maybe we can also address the difference between all that and diseased as well.
Okay, so there was some back and forth about disease and what those things mean. To me, when we walked up to the tree, there's an obvious decay point in the center of the tree. I don't know how the other arborist took samples. They didn't list it in their report, and I don't know where on the tree they got the samples that they then cultured in the lab, because it wasn't listed in the report. But you can see decay. It's obvious on both trees, both the one at 1431 with the canker and the decay point at the attachment in the tree at 1433.
Thank you. I also had a question of, which may be better for the city arborist, of when was, I think we heard at some point in this, but I just wanted to confirm, when was the last time these trees were pruned in a sort of proactive manner?
They were pruned in June, I think it was June 2018.
Okay, so, and you said, I think earlier, that's relatively recently compared to most city timelines.
Recent, yeah, we've gone through several sections of the city where the majority of trees are liquid amber, just safety risk reduction. But if I could go back to your previous question. At the pros meeting, I presented these trees. First of all, these came up because of the limb drop on the tree at 1431. And I noted that I observed some weeping and some discoloration on the one stem of the tree, but I wasn't, that wasn't my main concern. I was looking at the poor branching unions and the idea that it dropped limbs, and it had dropped a limb previously, I think also 2018, it dropped a limb. And then I noticed the other tree and noticed the structural problems, and I brought up the decay on that, but I wasn't stressing. I said it's probable canker. I'm not a tree risk qualified, tree risk assessment qualified person. Daria is, so she went and looked at this and said, oh yeah, that's canker on the tree. So.
Thank you. One last question for you. It was also mentioned several times in public comment about our upkeep of new plants and that some were dying due to not being cared for. Can you speak to that concern?
Sure. There's a few factors. For one thing, when a property owner applies to have a tree planted, they're responsible to maintain the tree, to water the tree. I've been sending out notices every month or every couple months describing how to best water the tree. We've issued water bags that you attach to the tree that does a slow drip watering. I've stressed this over and over, especially when we had these really hot, dry spells here and there. So there's that. There's trees that I've been trying to water myself with jugs of water in the back of my truck all summer long, and that's what I do on my spare time, had been doing. There's also the fact that we're in a bad drought, and the surrounding soil is really dry, so you pour water on the soil, and then a little bit of it seeps in and some of it seeps off, and it's really hard to keep these trees watered. And we have our soil's not good, not ideal. It's a hard clay soil, especially in the summer. It's just like cement. And Peggy Thompson Park was brought up, and the soil there is horrible. So we're trying to work with. We have a lot of trees established, but a few didn't make it. More than usual this year. In past years, we would lose 1 or 2 or 3 trees. This year, a dozen or so, and there were some that are struggling. Hopefully we get some rain, and next year they'll perk up. Marin Avenue is an example where we planted the trees last year. They kind of struggled along, but they finally took root, they took hold, and a few of them, one of the species is doing really well. I think if we replace trees that don't make it, we'll stick with the species that's doing well there. So.
Thank you.
Actually, I had another question, if I may, while he's up. Sorry to. It seems, well, I guess, would you have a guess on when these structural problems were introduced to the trees or when they occurred? So there's 4 stems on one of the trees, using the term. When do you think that started?
Well, they're at about 3-4 foot from the ground, so it's hard to say. This 40 years ago, maybe. I think that's part of the issue, and part of Peter Rudy's assessment is that, you know, he pointed out all the structural problems. He said, yeah, there are problems. There's risk here with these trees, and if they were maintained over time, we wouldn't have these problems. And the problem is they were not maintained over time, I feel. And liquid ambers are kind of prone to these kind of structural, these poor branching unions and included bark. And yeah, it's not something that we can say now, like the tree at 1431, we have a 10, 12-inch wide stem. It's not a good place to start, a good time to start pruning a tree for structural.
Yeah, so I mean, given where they're at, how big the stems are, my suspicion was it was decades ago. So
yes,
it's easy for things to go wrong and hard for things to go right.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
A final question for staff. as this was mentioned a couple times, of why aren't we waiting for us to do a master plan? What's a spitball timeline of how long the master plan could take to be completed?
We'll pass that on to Jeff here.
Good evening, Council. Jeff Pond, Community Development Director. Under the best of circumstances, where everything goes real smoothly and there aren't a lot of distractions, I would say a year, but that's not always what we have in Albany. So I would prepare yourself for the possibility that it's, say, a 2-year process.
Thank you. That's about what I figured. That's all the questions I wanted brought up from public comment. To say my thoughts here, I want to say I appreciate, Aaron, you mentioning at the start of your comment, this is a very difficult decision for us to make. I appreciate you saying that, especially because I know you feel very strongly about this topic. But it's hard to weigh when we have not only expert opinion from the city, but expert opinion on the other side, as well as a lot of passion from our residents, as well as we've mentioned, the concerns of the people besides the city most liable under the current law, those being the homeowners. That makes it all very, very difficult for us to make a decision, and not one I think any of us are looking forward to. That said, it's our responsibility as the city council to address the liability of the city and look after its fiduciary health. And that's a big thing that we talk about a lot on the council. And considering what we've been presented, and I have to say I agree with most of what Mayor Jordan said about this, that, this is partly due to an imperfect system of our laws currently that we may want to look at changing, but with how it is now and the evidence we've been presented, it's very hard to not go with the recommendation of our arborists. That all said, as I mentioned earlier, I do feel for the process concerns here, and I would be happy to have us give more time if the appellant would like to take the extra steps they mentioned in response to the report that we had prepared by our subsequent arborist. But if we were to vote tonight, I would struggle to not vote for removal of these trees.
Yeah, I would have to agree with both of you. It is a really hard decision. I really don't want to take the trees out. That just really bothers me. But I wrote down, it started with a limb drop. It didn't start from just somebody looking at it or somebody having a feeling, but it started from something that could have been catastrophic. And we're fortunate that it wasn't. And I think thinking about it that way, that's why we're doing this, is something did happen. It kind of puts it in a little different perspective, I think. Yeah, I can't say that we would support the appeal, or that I would support the appeal.
I guess the two possible directions, one, more time, is continued to allow time for the appellant to, I guess, go back to their experts in response to the city's risk assessment, or we proceed with a vote tonight.
What would we really gain from having going back for another opinion? I'm not sure what we would gain from that.
Well, I just think in fairness, I mean, come on. In all fairness, if it was one of us in this situation, we would want to be heard and make sure we present everything. And if the answer is no after that, okay, then it's no. But to simply just make a decision, well, we have what we needed, and we're based off of what we already have, without giving the other party a chance to even present something to counter that argument, I just think it's not fair, and that's my stance.
I would agree with that. To be upfront, I'm not imagining that the vote of this council is probably going to change due to that step, but if it is the fairer step, then I think it's one we could take and would be the right thing to do. If you're willing to entertain a motion, then I would move that we give the appellant time to prepare materials in response to the arborist report that was presented tonight. I don't know when to set a date to have this. I don't know if I need to. I'm looking at staff if they want that sort of direction.
I'll second that motion.
We may need to renotice this, which requires another 15 calendar days if you're continuing it. And I am a little hesitant how long you push this out, given that we do have reports that raise concerns. But if it's the pleasure of the council, then I would suggest we do set a date certain, maybe 2 meetings.
Yeah. 2 meetings is 14 days, so it would have to be 3 meetings from now, at least for 15-day notice. I mean, the notice has to be prepared and then sent out.
You'll have a new council in place. You'll have to start over.
Not necessarily. I don't think you'd have to start over. I mean, you're just regurgitating what we did. I mean,
I don't know.
But you would have 3 new council members at that point, so you would, it would probably be a redo of everything you've heard tonight.
And what is the sense that they've not had the chance to make their case? Are you saying, I mean, we've seen the arborists' reports and
Well, I think that the case is that the information on the risk assessment came in the last 5 days. It was released 5 days ago, which is a short time period for them to have their experts look at it. But if I go back to Peter Rudy's statement, he said, these trees can be preserved if they're pruned and cabled. And I don't want to go down the path of cabling street trees. I mean, he agrees with the basic premise that the city's urban forester and the risk assessor hired by the city has put forward, which is that these trees have major structural defects. So I agree. I don't see that there's a fundamental difference regarding what the state of these trees is. There's a difference in how much money should be spent to save them and what is reasonable to expect to save them. And so I don't think unless the council has an appetite for cabling them and spending the city resources and money to do that, which you've even heard from one of the arborists tonight that even cabling is questionable because of structural damage to the tree. But even if we were to do that, I mean, that seems like the only option based on what the experts have presented us, and I don't really see that as a viable option.
And the public interest should be in building a tree canopy, not in saving particular individual trees when it's really not much more than somewhat deferring the inevitable.
Doing this with a whole new council will be make it more complicated, but I will let the motion stand with the idea of doing it in the soonest council meeting possible, given our noticing requirements, which, as I'm hearing from staff, is our 3rd meeting from now.
I second that motion.
Is it possible to do a special meeting?
I mean, we already have
I know.
2 special meetings scheduled.
I wasn't going to say because we're getting so good at it,
Yeah.
but I was just.
I guess it could be added to one of the other special meetings.
Could it be added to one of the other special meetings?
December 8th, anybody? Or 7th, or whatever the day is, whatever the...
I'm challenged to answer that question, knowing how much else we're administering at this point in time. It's really the wish of the council at this point, and we'll accommodate as needed.
Well, I think if there's no other comment, then motion stands. And City Clerk, please poll the council.
Mayor Jordan?
No.
Councilmember McQuay?
No.
Councilmember Nason?
No.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann?
Yes.
And Councilmember Gary?
Yes.
Motion carries. Oh, sorry, the motion failed.
All right. Well, does any council member want to move the resolution?
I will move the resolution.
And this is Resolution 2022-114, which is to deny the appeal.
Correct.
Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded.
Councilmember Gary?
No.
Mayor Jordan?
Yes.
Councilmember McCray?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
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 And Vice Mayor Tiedemann?
Yes.
Motion carries. The resolution, I'm sorry.
That's okay. 2022-114.
Yes.
Resolution is passed. All right. I kind of feel like I need a break.
I was going to say,
Recess.
take a brief recess.
Yeah,
5 minutes?
I apologize. I did get rattled there. So 5-minute break. Which will take us to 9:45.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Nason is still with us or not. Hey, look at that. Looks like you had a good break.
Yeah, she probably got something to eat.
Yeah, I had that. There we go.
That's what I always.
She was being subtle, but I could see the clues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right on.
It's part of being home.
So with that, we will bring the meeting back into session. Next item is item of new business. This is advisory body work plan status reports. And I just want to start off by thanking all the advisory bodies and staff for assembling all this material for us to consider. And with that, if we could have staff's report on the item. If there is any, I don't know.
Yeah,
It's all self-explanatory. It's all right there. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, it's per council direction from the couple meetings ago, so.
Yeah, so I guess just to reiterate, I think I was the lead on this, if I recall correctly. Just to reiterate why I brought this forward, and thanks to the council for providing this direction, was to avail ourselves of the experience of the two council members who will be terming out, so that we can get their thoughts on potential reorganization rather than waiting for the new council alone. And so I felt that having the data of how each body has been proceeding and where it's at would be helpful information to feed into that consideration. That's my goal, is to sort of generate thoughts on, is the advisory body structure we have serving the current needs of the city? Is the progress that's being made appropriate? Any other thoughts that anybody has? So to start with, I am aware that there are two, I think a chair and a vice chair. Okay, vice chair, pardon me. I know there's two, and yourself? Okay, so the chair of two of the advisory bodies here in the room with us, thank you. And city clerk has informed me that there are chairs or vice chairs that are online virtually with us. So if any council members have any particular questions for any of them at this time, or otherwise we go to public comment based on what you've seen. Yeah, I can't tell. You look pensive. I'm not sure.
I'm trying to think how to ask this sort of tactfully. What's your goal at the end of this agenda item? What are we going to have in front of us?
So my goal is that we will have an understanding. I mean, and it's not on here as an action item, but we'll have an understanding on which or all of these bodies we think are serving the current needs of the city, or whether there's adjustments that need to be made going forward. Obviously not a final decision tonight, but some conception. So it's in the spirit of the biannual review that is done. That's my thought.
Okay.
Not seeing any other questions.
So I have
yes.
one.
Okay.
So I guess, description of the bodies, is this updated?
The description of the bodies that's highlighted in
As
each
far
work
as
plan?
As far as like their purpose, like on this one page, it has each one outlining their committee purpose. Is that updated?
That is the current, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's the current language. Yeah, so I mean, that's another area that could be adjusted, is making adjustments to those descriptions. Obviously, again, not tonight. We're just sort of gathering ideas this evening that could be carried forward. So with that, I guess we'll go to public comment. Are there any public commenters?
No.
Okay. I saw somebody hand you a slip of paper, but maybe that's for a future item.
No, they just
Okay.
asked if
Okay.
two in the room.
Okay, fair enough. So then we'll bring it back to the council. I guess this is my item. Maybe I'll kick off. I don't know if other people
No,
have
I
thoughts.
just think that there needs to be more teeth in the description. I think I've voiced that before.
Mhm.
You know, just for example, with the charter committee, it's just two-liners, but I think maybe giving maybe another line of why this is so important, like, because, you know, to the naked eye, people may not know, like, okay, so what am I supposed to do? They have a charter, you know, how can I make a difference? What changes can I make? You know, kind of thing. So I think and I'm just giving that as an example, just more meat to why this is important. What are your duties and, you know, what it entails. But we don't want to go over a paragraph, just enough to invite the volunteer to want to serve. And I think that's more of a marketing tool to get more volunteers to serve on these committees.
Thank you. Did you see any others in particular that stood out to you in that regard?
I believe all of them.
Okay, fair enough.
I just gave that. I mean, I think we just need to, there needs to be a thoughtful process on it, because over the past, well, at least since I've been here, we've struggled with trying to get the community to volunteer. I mean, we have over 20,000 residents, and what we get, maybe 8 applications at best. So how can we go out and fish, right? How do we promote, like, you want to serve, and this is why? And I think it's the lack of information and our marketing tools on getting, I mean, nothing against the staff, because there are videos out there, right? So we can direct them to that. But just think about the ones that the residents that don't have access to the videos. But if there's something written and they can get a clear understanding, then when council, mayor, vice mayor approach them, you know, the conversation is more robust, adding on to what is already written.
Thanks. Yes, Councilmember Nason.
Mayor, I recall that you had prepared at one point a report that compared Albany's advisory committees with the advisory committee structures or number of committees and so forth in other cities.
Yes, that's correct. And the results of that, so I compared it to other cities of similar size by population throughout the state and in the Bay Area, and then as well as, you know, nearby cities. And Albany had by far on the upper end in terms of number of advisory bodies. There were 2 cities that had more, as I recall. It was Orinda and Lafayette. And so you can take that for what you will. I mean, I certainly have in mind that there's too many. That's my bias. That's kind of why I brought this forward. So I wanted to review if there's any that potentially we could think about sunsetting. And so in that regard, I do think, given the work that's done, I do feel it's incumbent on me to make a few comments about each of the work plan status that's been put forward before jumping into that conversation. So maybe if the council will humor me, I'll just make a few comments on each, and you might have some comments in response on particular bodies. So for the Arts Committee, it seemed like there was some progress and got the first installation on the Greenway at long last, which is an accomplishment after, I know, a long number of years, and they're moving the social justice art project forward, so that was good to see. Charter Review Committee is making good progress on its 2 work plan items, and look forward to those reports coming forward. The Climate Action Committee has made a number of recommendations to this body that have been taken up, and so appreciate that work, and it was good progress. The Community Media Access Committee, it seemed like most of the items largely hadn't started. I also recall there was a push 2 years ago, or a suggestion 2 years ago, for that committee to have its scope expanded to consider how the city could communicate more effectively with the community, and I haven't seen that any of that work has been done. Economic Development Committee did good work on the surveys, is doing good work on the surveys, reviewing the COVID grant programs. I'm concerned about the number of subcommittees that are in progress without work products yet. So I guess we'll just see how that plays out. And just to be clear, my understanding of these work plans is that they are in effect through the end of the fiscal year we're in currently, which is June 30th. I see the city clerk nodding that I got that right. So this time isn't up, but this maybe a late stage review from one council member's perspective. The Financial Advisory Committee is making good progress. I look forward to the reports that they've generated that appear to be ready. I am concerned at how sporadic their meetings are. I don't think that we have, as a council, received a report from that body ahead of our consideration of the quarterly budget update in any of the quarters in this session, which I consider problematic. So it might be that that body needs to meet more often so that it can consider things ahead of us, which would definitely maximize the utility, and I think being in the spirit of the purpose of the committee. Parks, Rec, and Open Space. It's good work, although it's unclear how much work has been done this year so far. I do note that the first item on its work plan was not rated. Planning and Zoning has done tremendous work. Of course, they have the advantage or disadvantage, depending on their perspective, of meeting twice a month, unlike the other bodies, but they've brought a tremendous body of work forward, obviously with staff doing tremendous work as well. And that's very much appreciated. Social and Economic Justice Commission seem to have good progress in 2021. I don't see so much this year, but certainly welcome perspective on that, and probably will invite the vice chair up in a little bit to describe maybe how the trajectory of this year has gone. Transportation Commission's made good progress. Though I do see that the citywide street lighting evaluation, there's been no progress on, which is a real high-profile issue I hear over and over about, door to door, building to building, person to person. So I am concerned that progress hasn't been made on that. And I believe, I may be wrong, I think this is the second council session where it's been on the strategic plan. So I'm hoping that action will be taken there. I think when I was on the Transportation Commission, it reviewed and approved the RFP, and so that would have been 2 years ago at least. And yeah, so I'll close there. That's the last body. I have some other notes. I don't know if any of the other council members have any comments on anything that they read.
I do. So the one you just mentioned at the Transportation Commission, so how do you propose we get that to the top of the priority list and let that be kind of like their focal point moving forward?
Yeah, so my plan, if it doesn't happen, that it will be made the top priority in the next work plan, the next session. That'll be made very clear. And perhaps we have to raise the profile in the strategic plan. I know when we set our current strategic plan, my goal was to pare it down, so that those things that were on there, it was like no room not to get those done. So I will probably be pushing for that again. Yes, Councilmember Nason.
You know, I think it might be more, it's kind of hard to go through the committees and say, you know, well, this committee is doing really well and that committee, oh, no, it's not so good. That's not, you know, these are volunteers, they're working hard, they're doing good things. That's just, to me, that's just kind of a given. The issue here really is us. Are we getting recommendations that we're adopting that make sense, that are helpful? How are they doing at making us more productive by giving us advice that we feel comfortable relying on? You know, and one thing we didn't mention tonight, as we were talking about the trees, was that the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission, you know, made a decision, and that's another thing that we really should take into account as we're making decisions like this. That other people who are supposed to have more time and focus for a particular issue have already done their work on the issue as well. So my concern, a kind of overarching concern about committees and commissions, is staffing them. And, you know, I've had a real concern for several reasons, about the Social and Economic Justice Commission. One of the issues was the difficulty it is to staff that, it has been to staff that committee. So I think that we should be looking at this in terms of structure. Have they brought forward recommendations that the council has adopted or used significantly in building its own approach to issues? I would be happy to kind of talk about some of the individual committees and commissions, not in terms of rating their work, but in terms of whether they have the extent to which they have helped move us forward in our efforts. But again, going back to that overarching concern, I think that our biggest challenge, I don't want to say failure, but our biggest challenge and ongoing challenge as a council is to communicate to the staff what the priorities really are. What do they need to do? What is absolutely crucial to do versus what we hope they can do and want them to do, and encourage them to give us really honest feedback about what they can and cannot do. And that's the only way that the council is going to be able to set priorities. We've been talking about street lighting since I came on the council, and it hasn't gotten done. And it hasn't gotten done because, you know, it's us. That's not on the staff, that's on us. We haven't made it enough of a priority. And again, it's not on the Transportation Commission either, but we should be talking about, is the commission structure helping us get to the place where we are effectively communicating our policies and priorities? And is the staff getting loud and clear messages about what we really think should be at the top of the to-do list?
Thank you. Do you have any thoughts on bodies that, I mean, so I think you suggested a viewpoint or looking through recommendations that have come to the council that are helping the council to be more productive. So are there any bodies that you...
Well, I'll give a couple of suggestions, you know, and of course you've heard me there. I have had issues with the Social and Economic Justice Commission's operations during the past year. But setting that piece aside, if we're going to have a policing commission, you're going to have a lot of the same people interested in social and economic justice are going to be interested in that commission. You're likely to have a number of the same challenges. I would suggest putting the SEJC on pause at least until the policing commission is up and running and working effectively. I think that trying to run them both at the same time is going to be, it's already, just having the SEJC seems to be terribly challenging. Getting this new committee going, I do think having one focus is better than having two. So that would be one. I would also suggest that charter review be an ad hoc committee. I don't think it makes sense to have it as a committee that's kind of, you know, looking for issues. It should be that the council wants to get something done. If it needs a committee to look into it more deeply, it can have an ad hoc charter review committee as needed. Those would be my two, you know, first and foremost. Economic development, you know, there are certain activities. Economic development is one, and probably the community media access is one as well. It doesn't seem to me that their role is so much to advise the council. They're trying to look for, they're working on projects. So say the Economic Development Committee, they'd like to have, we'd love to have a beautiful farmer's market like Kensington. Kensington has a wonderful farmer's market just across the border. We'd love to have something like that, and we just have never quite gotten it together. So they're looking for things like that. The CMAC works primarily on the film festival, all great. But these are efforts that I think are probably more hampered by the Brown Act and the committee structure than they are really helped by it. I'd rather see those things going to more independent nonprofit or quasi-governmental bodies that that are not operating as deliberative bodies that make recommendations to the council, but are operating as kind of action teams that are looking for and developing things to advance their areas of concern. So I'd look at both CMAC and economic development as areas where there might be a more effective structure for what we're really trying to accomplish with them.
I very much appreciate you sharing all your thoughts, your experience, and your 6 years of perspective. 6 years? Do I have that right? 8 years, sorry. 8 years. Does anybody else have thoughts?
Yeah, I'll jump in. We must have the same 8-year experience. We have a lot of similar things, and we had talked about this earlier with charter review. You know, I think either an ad hoc committee or a task force, and I'm not committed to either one of those two things, makes more sense for that. It doesn't, the charter is only going to change at an election, and so it doesn't really need to function all the time. SCJC, the one thing I thought was really good was several years ago, we actually gave them one thing to work on, which was aging in place. That was to be a focus. And then COVID came and everything fell apart. But we did get a good report on that. And I think if there was a committee, and I think it could be a task force, with a very specific topic in mind that people were going to work on. And under the huge umbrella of social justice, but that's such a huge topic that you really can't just sort of generally focus on that, because you think about climate justice and economic justice and police justice and all of these things. It's too much. And I think having a task force that's really focused on one thing would be better. CMAC, Film Fest is certainly moving into a far more independent organization. And so I think that's sort of out of the purview of CMAC at this point, or will be by next year. And then, again, I think it could be handled not by an advisory body, but, if the goal is to talk about how we communicate with people, let's bring some people together and talk about just that and really dive into it. And how would we do that? And what might that look like over maybe a 4-month period or a 5, something short, get the work done, have a work product and move on. And I also think maybe people would be more willing to serve if we said, we'd like you to, we have this opportunity, it's going to be a 6-month project, this is what you're going to do, rather than it's a 2-year commitment and you're going to do this huge project and we don't really know what you're going to do. So I think, and economic development is kind of the same thing. If we want to do a farmer's market, let's bring some people in to figure out how to do a farmer's market. And the other piece of economic development is Brennan's doing a great job on that piece, and we have John Montag. So we actually have staff that we haven't ever had before. So I don't know that we need a full-blown committee to do that. And a lot of these, we know we're going to have. We're going to have planning and zoning. We're going to have transportation. We're going to have arts. So that's kind of out of the discussion. I mean, refining them may be possible, but we know we're going to have them. So it's just maybe these 3 or 4 that are kind of teetering in my mind.
Thank you. Yes, Vice Mayor.
There's some of this I agree with. I think that for CMAC, a lot of the things on here haven't been worked on a ton. I think the most important one, as you pointed out earlier, of increasing access hasn't been worked on, which is something they pushed for. That one seems maybe the most obvious if we are trying to pare down our committees. I think if we want that thing to still get worked on, so I would suggest we move at least that over to SEJC's purview, if in whatever form we keep SEJC, which I think we should. There's a large discussion to be had about what their purpose is and how broad it is. I think there might be something there of, having 3 or 4 big things that they work on, like partly that access part, or City Manager, you mentioned more than a month or 2 ago that, we don't really have a body to do some of the things that are required, I think, by our housing element or state law. So we may need to task one of our committees with, looking at, I think it's about affirmatively furthering fair housing requirements. And having the SEJC take that on, I think, makes some sense. I actually had I had the same thought as Councilmember McQuaid of some of these we know we're going to have. Our Venn diagram of those doesn't exactly overlap, though, interestingly, I was going to say that I think that we could combine the Arts Committee with the Economic Development if we really wanted to pare down. I was on Economic Development. There was talk then about more collaboration between the Arts Committee and Economic Development. They have been continuing that even more. It's obvious that there's a bit of overlap there and some sort of mutual interest that I think could work as one committee if we did some work on how that would be defined. Charter review, when we discussed this last, I was with Mayor Jordan and saying that I wanted that to remain. There's a large discussion to be had here about the charter and how it should be amended and how much focus we give to it. In the spirit of paring down the compromise, I could be happy with having it be ad hoc. It would make me sad a little bit. And they only have 2 things, but those are weighty things that they've done obviously good work on. But if we need to, that's something I can envision.
Thank you. I don't know if you know. Okay.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by your idea of combining arts and economic development, but I realized, it was at least my perception this time, when they tried to work together, their goals aren't the same. The art was more of a pure art, and the economic development was more of a fantasy, whimsical kind of thing, and there was a real headbutting. Not to say it couldn't work, but I think you need to sort of recognize that going in. And that surprised me, because I thought it was a perfect marriage, and not so much. So, something to be aware of.
So I think I'll take the opportunity to invite the Vice Chair of Social and Economic Justice to maybe make a few comments on whichever one. Yeah, and thank you again for attending in person.
Absolutely. So the impromptu being here, our chair was not able to attend. What I can comment is just to push a little back on, I believe this is Rochelle Nason. The Social and Economic Justice Committee is really a safe space for a lot of the Albany residents who are of color to come and voice their concerns. And that's a space that really doesn't exist anywhere else in the city of Albany. We're also tasked with economic justice when we are in a city that has had a difficult history of redlining and exclusion to people of color and minorities and those who are in poverty. And so it's important that the SEJC continue, because it does provide a different perspective to a primarily white and affluent community. One of the overarching issues that I'm bringing to the commission is that instead of focusing on racial inequities, that we first apply the lens of poverty, because poverty does impact aging in place. Because what we're discussing is a limiting income. And the issues that affect elderly also affect the unhoused and the young students at UC Berkeley Village and women. And those are perspectives that are difficult to uphold and give voice to. And so I hope that the SEJC continues with, of course, a more focused approach. I would agree that it is a little broad and we need to bring it in.
I'm very enthused by what you just said.
Well, thank you.
I started working on, I guess, as an affluent white homeowner. It took working on an endorsement committee with another homeowner, but who was not well off in 2008, to motivate me to look at my property tax bill, which I just assumed it's an obligation. I just pay it, don't think about it. And she was getting priced out. And that was the beginning of my focus on economic justice in the city. And so I've been working to try to, with every tax measure, make an improvement with that opportunity. Obviously, that's trying to take care of the city's own business, but that's near and dear to my heart. That's part of what Measure K is about, is another opportunity to do that. So, yeah, you sold me on the vision.
Thank you. It's also a pathway to other governing bodies. A lot of the people who serve on the SEJC also become more influential members here at Albany Council. So we're hoping that some of those members will fill some of the seats that are becoming vacant.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Nason.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on something. I'm glad to hear that the SEJC has become a safe space for people of color, because my big objection to SEJC was when we had an SEJC member characterizing the Project Roomkey motels as, quote, ghetto, and comparing the sex workers in those motels to describing them as an infestation, which I felt was a profoundly dehumanizing way to talk about people. And I've had concerns about what that the SEJC, and that's not the only one, but the SEJC seemed to be almost a contradiction in terms at certain points. So if that has improved, and it is now a place where people are not dehumanized and people are given, people of color are encouraged to feel safe, that's a huge turnaround, and that's wonderful to hear. So I'm very glad to hear that. Thank you.
Great. Well, I will just add to, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for presenting that. I'm glad that SEJC is considered a place for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people and people of color. I appreciate that, and I look forward to seeing more work being done in that area. But with that said, I guess my question is, what is the hesitation on, or is there, let's put it like this, is there a hesitation with having something for renters? I know I've spoke so much about protecting the renters or having a space for them to come in and speak on some of the things that they're experiencing as renters. And, you know, there's no outlet for that. It's basically, you know, somehow we have to be able to work with the landlords and the renters in the space. And you know, as far as our housing element, if we can have, you know, maybe an ad hoc committee, but at least the renters' voices will feel like they're being heard, right? You know, I'm a renter as well. And so as prices continue to go up, inflation continue to go up, I think there needs to be a space for renters, which are the majority of our residents here, to have some type of committee that they can work on to help with the housing element as well. I think that's important.
So that's a proposal for an additional body or for refocusing of a current body, or?
Well, I mean, it sounds like y'all removing a lot of bodies. But so if that's the case, I mean, it doesn't have to be an actual body, maybe an ad hoc or a task force. But as we're continuing to work on the housing element, I think there needs to be at least 5, maybe 10 individuals that will be able to work with staff to present something that's just not one-sided, where the voices of the renters are being heard and being a part of that housing element, developing that.
May I comment?
Yes.
Thank you. So the SEJC does have a housing subcommittee, and I am also part of that subcommittee. And what we are working on is working with renters here in Albany, but also with the landlords. It's important that we have what is it called? Give me just a second. Sure. An open forum for discussion. And we did have something planned for November 10th, but taking into consideration that that's also an election week, we thought it would be too much for the residents to handle all at once. So we have deferred that, hopefully for December or January when the new council comes in, so that they can give us a little bit of perspective and direction and how we should handle that. I can't comment on making another advisory body, but if the SEJC also takes into consideration that the majority of renters are a diverse group of racial and ethnic minorities, then that it should remain with the SEJC.
Thank you. Yes, maybe there's a mechanism.
I mean, as long as, like Councilmember McQuaid stated, if they're going to focus on that, they really need to focus on that particular one instead of, you know, trying to grab everything that's coming their way. If that's going to be the focus for the year, then let renters and landlords be the focus and then come up with a product presented to the council to vote on and implement policy if needed.
Yes, that kind of brings to mind an idea, and maybe that combining with something that Councilmember Nason said, which is the work plans. I mean, again, I'm all for trying to pare them down so that they're focused, but also trying to put some priority or some, you know, this comes first, this comes second. I mean, obviously things have to sometimes go in parallel, but that might be an improvement that could be made next time.
May I add a comment as well?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I stayed until 10, so I'm going to use this
no, by all
time.
means. I appreciate you're here.
If we're already having a challenge in staffing the committees that we have, then creating an additional body would sort of aggravate or perpetuate that issue. What I would like to recommend as the SEJC Vice Chair is that the appointments are done in a timely manner. I submitted my application, and it took several months to be appointed, and I was appointed at the end of the commission, so I'm limited in what I can do and what I can recommend to the rest of the commission. So if we can appoint people in a timely manner, then we can work and make recommendations to the council in a timely manner as well.
I will offer from my institutional experience that there's been more turnover on more bodies than I have seen in the previous 20 years that I've been following Albany government. Could be a lot of reasons for that, a lot of hypotheses, but I can assure you, at least with the new council, all the seats will be filled from the outset. So a lot of what has happened is because there have been so many resignations. But but at least all the bodies will start out at full strength.
May I interrupt for just a minute and move to extend till 11?
Thank you.
Seconded.
City Clerk, if you please poll the council.
Councilmember McCray?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann?
Yes.
Councilmember Gary?
As long as it's 11 o'clock. Yes.
Mayor Jordan?
Yes, with the promise to wrap it up. Yes, Councilman.
I do want to make a comment, guys, that the 10:30 thing, why we have to have a motion and everything, is because we are supposed to be done by 10:30. If we're not done by 10:30, we're not doing good. Thanks.
Fair enough, thank you.
I just wanted to confirm, Mayor,
Yes.
I think we're supposed to list the items too that we're going to hear.
Okay. Let's see.
11-1 and 11-2.
Oh, my gosh. This is 11-1.
Yeah, so we'll finish 11-1 and do 11-2, and then we'll be done.
Oh, great.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much. I will also say that of the bodies that came to mind that could potentially transition / sunset, I agree. I mean, Charter Review Committee was one that I pushed for. I think they've done good work on the 2 items, and doesn't seem like those are coming to fruition with amendment recommendations right away. So, you know, that's fine. We'll get the report. But I think when that work is done, then that can switch to a as-needed body. The Community Media Access Committee with the film festival becoming its own independent entity. I think that is an opportune time for it to transition onward to being no longer needed. I mean, it was originally founded when I believe a cable channel came to Albany, and it was a mechanism for the community to have access to the cable channel. Well, cable's gone away to some extent, and I'm not aware that the body continues to do that work. So it seems like it's not really fulfilling the charge, in part due to technological change. And then economic development, I agree with many of the comments that were made. So I appreciate everyone taking that tour into organizational. Yes.
You know, there's something to think about. There was a youth, I guess, committee, maybe. You may want to explore that, you know, possibly having some type of internship for seniors, or I think the voting age is 18. So it's between 17 and 18. But maybe shadow council member, vice mayor, mayor, you know, pique their interest, because that will help with future generations as we get more up in age. I'll say that. Instead of old. I think having that buffer, you know, of young people, Gen X, Zs, or whatever the terms are, I think that will benefit the city, because, you know, fresh minds thinking, moving forward. I think that's something to explore.
Thanks. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Internship, shadowing, because I know that the city on the staff side has internships,
Right.
and there's obviously
Right. But if the council
school district
could.
appoints people to
Right.
students to bodies, but to actually have
Right.
students, if there's ones that are interested in shadowing or mentoring or learning from a council member, that's a pretty interesting
Yeah.
idea. Yeah. Thanks. All right. With that, we've certainly accomplished what I had in mind. And again, I thank everybody.
Could we go back to SAJC for just a minute? Sure. I think Councilmember Gary has, you know, has explained it pretty well, that we do need a body to, I don't know, assist with the housing element or work with the housing element, however that comes out. Is it appropriate for us now to kind of decide that's what we want, rather than start out with SEJC as sort of this broad term, and then all of a sudden we're switching it? And maybe not tonight, but maybe in the next meeting or two, or is that, am I jumping the gun here?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about the process going forward. I didn't know if it would be precipitous for this body itself to make a decision, given the next body coming on, rather than handing forward ideas. I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, so I'm curious what other council members think.
I just don't want to lose that thought.
Yeah, yeah.
Councilmember Nason.
Jason?
I think it's appropriate for us to make a recommendation.
Yes.
But ultimately, it's for the next council to make the decision, which they should probably do just as quickly as they can upon taking office. But I don't think we should be making any decision for them, but give them our recommendation opinions.
And that was, I thought, in bringing this item forward was to provide advice for the new council right out the gate, so it doesn't spend time appointing bodies and getting that inertia, and it can make adjustments right away. So it seems like an action item might be to frame a proposal. That would be a motion for recommendation, and I can take on drafting that, and then whatever adjustments get made. But I can bring that to one of our few remaining meetings. How many meetings do we have left? I think we have 2 meetings left, right? 2 regular meetings? Okay. I'm seeing general nods of agreement that that's an action item to go forward with. Right? So with that, we'll go to item 11-2. And so this is an amendment to City Council procedures and policies regarding mayor and vice mayor appointment. This came up because I realized that the way that thank you for attending, Vice Chair of Planning and Zoning, and anybody else who's out there left in virtual world, that the way that the language of our procedure was currently structured was based on the old election method of plurality at large. It didn't take into account ranked choice. And so in looking at that in detail to come up with a proposal of how to change that to accommodate the new method, I observed there were a few other things that could usefully be changed while that was being corrected. So hopefully that part is in front of you, and happy to answer any questions on that. The other pieces that I saw was that the current procedure refers to the council filling the vacancy as an election, whereas it's really universally referred to as an appointment. And I know from talking to people in the city, they're confused about whether they elect the mayor or not, even though it's not on their ballot. A lot of people think they elect the mayor. So I think using the term election rather than appointment would just furthers that confusion. So I'm suggesting changing the language in the procedure to appointment. I'm suggesting that if there is an appointee, that they not be put in the queue as a matter of democratic principle, since they were not affirmed by the voters. And generally, an appointee would only be for a maximum of 2 years in any event. So if they were put in the queue somewhere in the bottom, they wouldn't be becoming mayor before the next election anyway. So just to provide clarity around that. And let's see. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it at that. So I don't know if there's any questions or comments on this. Yes.
In looking at this, and I went back and looked at the charter, the language in the charter says the council, the newly constituted council shall then elect one of its members as presiding officer. And so it makes me think that we can't change the terminology to appointed if in fact the charter says elected.
Okay.
But can you amend that?
I'm sorry, what?
Can you amend that charter, or what's the process
We could
of amending that
amend.
language?
Yeah, but
And I
we
don't
have to
know
go to the
that,
ballot.
yeah, I mean,
It has to go on a ballot for that to change.
Any word, any comma, any
If we
period, anything.
if we only had a charter review committee. So I would be hesitant for that reason.
Okay.
And as far as not putting an appointed person in the queue, I understand what you're saying. I don't think I agree with that. I mean, that puts that person, you're separate from the rest of the council. You're different, and we're trying to be equal. And the other thing is, it may not be one person. We could have something horrible happen and have 3 council members killed or leave or something. So I think we need to be more flexible in this whole thinking about appointments.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. I mean, they're part of the council. I can't imagine them feeling like they're not. I mean, they're, if they're on there for 2 years, I mean, those years go fast if they decide they want to run. I mean, so you think about it, if they come on as appointed, right, and the description is given, only finishing the rest of someone's term, and then you push them up as mayor or vice mayor, they may not, that may cause some type of, I don't know, shock to them to where, like, you only told me this, now you want me to do this. So if we do that, then you might need to change, the approach as far as appointing. When we appoint you, it is for you to be council and potentially mayor or vice mayor. But he's saying that maybe they should, have those 2 years and then come back around after, serving and then get in the rotation. Is that what you're trying to put forward?
I'm saying then the seat would be up for election.
Yeah.
So if they chose to run and they won,
Then they would be in the rotation.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they'd be at the bottom of the rotation, probably.
Well, no, they would be wherever the procedure says they would be in the queue. I mean, if they won first.
On ranked choice vote, okay.
Or if in the old system they got the most votes, then they would be the top below the continuing council members. So they could be number 3. They could be number 2.
Sounds confusing.
Yeah. So they would get put in the queue in whatever position they would be put in the queue as a newly elected council member.
Right, but they could have served for 2 years and then be put in the queue below people that were elected at the same time as them.
Mhm.
And that, to me, doesn't seem quite right.
I'll just offer that I agree with the mayor's reasoning of, I think there is a difference of getting elected versus not. And I don't think that's us, shunning them and saying you can't play with us. But, it's a recognition of that to some extent. And I think I get that reasoning.
Maybe a way to approach this, just take it in pieces. Although maybe, I don't know, if we can get to one motion, that would be most efficient. I don't know, Councilmember Nason, if you have any thoughts on this. No, okay. Okay. Interesting, I will note that I believe in the city code, it still refers to us as having a city administrator. I think it also refers to that in the charter, that we have a city administrator. Because I remember that issue coming up about 10 years ago. So I don't know that a language mismatch between the charter and, I mean, it could be cured by saying appointment referred to as elected in the charter to keep it clear for people. I mean, like I say, I talked to a lot of people who think they elect the mayor in the city.
Oh, I know. Well, do you have a thought on that? Does it matter?
I mean, it's worded as elect, but you're really appointing.
I mean, we all refer to it as appointment.
Correct.
Continually, so.
So I don't necessarily, I mean, by the action itself, it's an appointment, it's not an election. So I think the charter isn't probably accurately worded.
Yeah.
At some point, as a cleanup, that can happen.
Yeah, okay.
So should we have not changed the process when we went to the rotation system? Because previously, the council just elected the mayor from 5 people. And then we decided to change it so the vice mayor became the mayor and there was a whole rotation thing. Should we have not done that because it's in conflict with the charter, or does that matter?
I see what you're saying. I think your process of election/appointment is just being called out in detail by adoption of whatever policy you're adopting.
Okay.
So I don't see them as in conflict.
Okay.
And even under the prior process, colloquially, I don't recall people referring to the council as electing the mayor. I don't know what your experience was talking to people, but generally, people refer to it as the council appointed the mayor for the year.
I think it was, well, I always thought of it as elected because there were ballots.
Yeah.
Ballots to be an election, but let's move on.
Okay, all right. Yes,
Would you entertain a motion?
please.
Then I move.
Wait, there's public comment.
Oh, sorry about that. Hi there. Welcome back.
Thank you. A public comment. So it sounds like in the charter it says elect. Just wondering why the mayor isn't on the ballot to be elected, such as Berkeley's mayor. The people get to vote, right? So I'm wondering why the people of Albany don't get to vote on who the mayor is and who the vice mayor is. You know, the people get to decide. Basically, the way it seems is that the people get to decide who the council is, then you amongst yourselves get to appoint the mayor and vice mayor. But I mean, it seems like it's in the charter, I guess, I'm not looking at it right now, but if it's elected, that should just be on the ballot then, to where the people get to vote for the mayor and the vice mayor. I mean, I know we're under the form of government of city manager, city council, and not like Berkeley where it's mayor, city council. So there's a difference between forms of government. You know, and it's kind of interesting, you guys are making this decision just before the new council. So it's kind of like you're making decisions on how the new council gets to run their course. It's kind of like you're throwing this in there now to almost protect either your seats at the table for longevity, or it kind of seems kind of on the sly to where you're making this important decision that directly affects the new council. So why not let the new council in on this decision-making process? Because they're going to be the ones that are directly affected by your decision tonight. So keep that in mind. I mean, we waited all year. This didn't come up until just now. And then elections are tomorrow. You're trying to make a vote and trying to make a resolution on something that affects the people of tomorrow. And you're trying to do that today. But I don't know. I mean, I would just say, you probably won't table it, but I would just say table it to possibly let the new council decide on how they get to choose mayor and vice mayor. Because they may have more input on that sort of thing. And for you to make decisions for them almost seems kind of, you know, counterproductive in a way. Because they're going to be on the body for 40 years. I guess, I'm not sure how it's going to work since now there's an open seat, right? Instead of 2 being elected, I'm not sure how this election is going to run if there's a 3rd seat that's going to be elected. But just consider that this decision tonight affects tomorrow's elected officials.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to explain why I brought this forward tonight. It is specifically because the election is tomorrow, and the current procedure does not appropriately consider the current election method, which is ranked choice. And so if we don't change the procedure, it's going to be a misfit. So that's the motivation. In terms of what the charter says, around the mayor, it says the council, as thus newly constituted, shall then elect one of its members as its presiding officer, who shall have the title of mayor. So the charter specifies that the voters don't elect the mayor, that the council chooses the mayor. There was a measure in 2008 that the voters turned down, which is a proposal to directly elect the mayor, but it 52% no against. So the voters have weighed in on that question.
And now I have a motion. I move that we approve the amendment to our procedures and policies in section L-1D.
I will second that motion. No comment. It's been moved and seconded, the amendments as proposed.
Councilmember Nason?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Tiedemann?
Yes.
Councilmember Gary?
Abstain.
Mayor Jordan?
Yes.
And Councilmember McQuay?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. With that,
Good night.
and with some sadness, we are adjourned.
Thank you
I
very
wish
much.
you the best on your travels. Here, there, and everywhere.
Have a good night.